Li Yi was never supposed to be a hero, just the guy everyone threw into the fire when they wanted to save themselves. But the world picked the wrong man to break, because the moment that shadow answered him, the moment his weakness shattered, that's when everything changed. And here's how his rise truly began. The story kicked off with Li Yi coughing again and again, choking on the bitter absurdity of why it always had to be him. A debt collector informed him that death didn't cancel obligation, and another chimed in with the lovely reminder that a father's debts transferred to the son without fail. Li Yi hit back, bringing up how his parents had died mining for them, insisting that if anything, they owed him instead. Later, a co-worker remarked that if he completed the awakening, maybe there'd still be a sliver of hope for the rest, and emphasized that even if only 1 in 1,000 pulled it off, someone had to try. Li Yi shot back with a sharp question about why that someone had to be him, pointing out that if the odds were that bad, maybe they should be the ones rolling the dice. He threw down the accusation that their fear of death didn't justify shoving him forward as the expendable one. He hit the ground hard, jaw clenched against the same question circling again. Why? It always fell to him. He looked up from the dirt, teeth gritted. A towering monster loomed, claws held high. He demanded to know why the burden of survival always landed on him, even now, skewered straight through by the thing. Hanging there, he gnawed on the ugly thought that maybe it all came down to nothing but a lack of strength. He didn't let go of the next question either, the one about why weakness automatically meant dying, just as the system confirmed a binding with an unidentified life form and kicked off its analysis. The system promptly announced activation of the shadow system, while he lay sprawled across the ground, eyes glowing bright. It had all started back when he worked as a veteran interdimensional miner, trapped in a hazmat suit and risking his neck to dig up energy stones in alien hellholes. A supervisor noted that his performance this month looked solid, and predicted that with another year, he might finally clear his parents' debt. If he gritted his teeth for 3 to 5 more, maybe a shabby apartment would be in reach, and Li Yi answered with firm resolve that he'd keep going. But in his head, he waved off the supervisor as a black-hearted capitalist and grumbled that once the debt vanished, so would he, questioning why he should burn 5 more years and urging the boss to step up instead. Radiation from those zones carried a 1 in 1,000 shot at awakening someone, but the stuff remained lethal. Nobody signed up for otherworld mining in a suit unless desperation had them in a stranglehold. A miner asked whether Li Yi was the one whose parents had died in an accident 3 years ago, got no payout, and inherited their debt like a curse. Another clarified that NG Group had dumped the blame on the parents and claimed millions in damage, then tossed in that Li Yi's situation was pitiful. One miner gave a colder read, saying weakness defined him, and adding that in his shoes, he would have forced the group to pay, no matter the cost. Another clarified that he meant making them pay with their lives, but the first replied that since they were already dead, cashing it in made more sense. Li Yi echoed the word weak, letting it fall from his lips again. Sometimes, weakness didn't belong to the person at all. It belonged to the world gone completely off the rails. The supervisor gathered the team with a sharp order to get ready, announcing that work was starting now. A loud crash burst near the cave entrance, and a miner shouted that it looked like a cave-in. The supervisor brushed it off as a minor quake and scoffed at the panic, while another miner, worn to the bone and channeling full-on background NPC vibes, muttered that after digging through countless regions, he'd never heard of earthquakes in dimensional zones. One floated the idea of monsters, and the next repeated the suspicion with growing edge, asking whether that might actually be the case. Another pointed out that this place had once housed alien-human hybrids, and one warned that hybrids were worse than insectoids or beast races, while a third spat out that the whole job had become too cursed to continue. The supervisor commanded silence, reminding them all that awakened operatives had cleared the region 3 years prior, ruling out any chance of hybrid activity. While he began issuing threats about inciting panic, a giant finger punched through his torso without warning, ripped straight from a Shingeki no Kyojin death montage with zero buildup. A miner's eyes widened and he cried out in alarm. Another yelled that the supervisor had just taken a hit. Li Yi glanced up in disbelief, recognizing that no one had seen this coming. The supervisor, mouth bleeding, stared ahead in paralyzed horror. The creature moved into view before the group, and someone screamed that it was a hybrid. Multiple monsters surged in, triggering panic, as the miners screamed and scattered. Li Yi broke into a run, muttering that they were still over 10 kilometers from the dimensional exit. He questioned whether running even mattered at this point. The threat had already surpassed anything humans were equipped to handle. A miner flew past his back. They were slammed into a boulder with crushing force, the kind of panel that screams for black and white speed lines in a Dondadan spread. Li Yi hit the dirt, coughing hard. One miner yelled for the driver to start the truck, while another sprinted toward it, pleading for them not to leave. Li Yi reached out for the truck and shouted for them to stop. Inside, two people froze as a towering monster landed on the roof. Its claws tore through the metal while the two stared upward, too stunned to run. The creature launched skyward, hauling them both as the truck detonated below. Li Yi registered that the monsters were zeroing in on passengers inside the carriage as two more closed in. An explosion followed, engulfing the creatures in a wave of fire. Li Yi shielded his face and looked up, stunned. 3 flaming monsters shrieked as the blaze consumed them. Li Yi fixed his gaze on the fire, suspecting it might be the key. He made the call to test it. But another monster lunged at him, its movement catching his eye from the right. He sprinted toward the closest fire with the creature barreling after him. He reached for the flames. He snatched up a burning branch and declared that this was it, gripping it like a first-year Shunin protagonist mid-epiphany. He swung it forward, warning the creature to stay back. As the flame cut through the air, he noted that it confirmed his hunch. He called out for attention and announced that the monsters feared fire. 10 years earlier, gates erupted across the planet, rifting reality open as monsters from other dimensions flooded into Earth. Only those awakened by radiation exposure developed powers strong enough to fight back, their strength unfolding with the rigged thrill of pulling an S-class from a gacha pool wired by cosmic cheat codes. Their emergence allowed humanity to seal the gates and siphon interdimensional energy into usable fuel. At this moment, none among them had awakened. They remained regular people clinging to survival while Li Yi pushed them forward, torchlight jittering in desperate hands. They couldn't outrun the monsters tearing through the gates, no matter how obsessively they'd studied the Hunter exam arc for guidance. One miner, hands twitching, realized the torch wouldn't hold out much longer. There was gasoline in the storage room. Li Yi explained that fire at the entrance might stall the creatures until help arrived. He directed them to form a circle, stand back to back, and move as one. He gave a nod once they aligned, bracing against the approaching monsters. He called for gasoline to be poured near the entrance, and another confirmed it was done. A barrel tipped, gasoline flowing in thick, slow waves. They clustered at the threshold as the fuel spread, and Li Yi ready to torch. Several miners followed, flinging their own with jerky panic, bodies flailing like it was the final phase of a co-op raid, no one queued for willingly. Fire flared beneath a monster's feet. It burned and shrieked, flames eating through it. A miner addressed Li Yi, linking their survival to his plan. Without it, they'd have been gone. Another vowed to repay him someday. Li Yi turned his head, his eyes locked onto a massive stone statue that refused to be ignored. A miner remarked that it had been unearthed weeks ago, assuming the supervisor planned to flip it on the black market, unaware they'd pulled a boss-tier artifact straight from a shonen cold open. Li Yi studied its ancient surface while others caught a signal from the rescue team and asked for the ETA. A miner reported hybrid attacks and demanded immediate evac. The reply gave them a 2-hour window and warned them to hold on, while another couldn't hide his disbelief at the delay. He urged haste and kept calling through the comm. The miners froze in place, the radio whispering with static. One noted their suits had 90 minutes of energy left. Another chimed in, afraid for the family waiting back home. A third argued they should flee now, claiming waiting meant dying. Li Yi kept still and checked his wrist. The screen showed 61%, and he understood they wouldn't last. He hoped rescue came anyway. Suddenly, a miner told them to stop and listen, throwing Li Yi off. The miner pointed out the suits wouldn't make it to rescue and announced that someone had to go. He proposed the old man or an orphan, rattling off villain origin cliches with unnerving efficiency. Li Yi had no family and carried deep debt. His life amounted to pain. He offered his battery instead, but Li Yi met him with a cold stare. The miner punched him, demanding to know if he still planned to resist or even had it in him. Another egged him on, provoking him to fight back. Maybe the radiation would trigger something. A different voice framed it as fate, saying power would make him a hero. Li Yi cursed them, vowing that if he ever awakened, they'd be first on his list. A miner dismissed the odds with the same apathy used to skip throwaway lines during a bad gacha draw, mocking the idea of a 1 in 1,000 miracle, while another confirmed a battery had been taken. Someone raised the next name for testing, but no one answered. Without warning, another miner broke into a sprint, shouting he'd take someone's place instead. Shouts followed as the group chased him. He clambered onto a truck while someone barked for him to stop. The miner declared that if this was the end, they might as well fall together. The massive statue slid from the truck as others scrambled away. A miner yelled for the driver to brake before the statue hit the flames, dread thickening at the thought of catastrophic backlash. Moments later, one confirmed the fire had been knocked over, and another shouted that hybrids were breaking through. There was no option left but to run. Li Yi looked upward, uncertain. He wondered if the statue had laughed. He considered whether even that ancient slab had started mocking him, silently tallying his collapse with the smug precision of a solo-leveling tragic backstory counter. A monster barreled forward out of nowhere and shattered the statue's head. Li Yi raised his eyes, not even surprised, and demanded a reason for why it always circled back to him. He pressed further, demanding why the burden never missed, as the monster clutched him by the head like a forgotten doll. With every blow and a steady trail of blood, he demanded whether this endless spiral had always been his fault for being weak. He recalled the orders barking at him to leave, the convenient story about his parents being dead, the cold certainty that no relative would lend a hand, and the demand to pay back the debt anyway. The boss chimed in just to hurry him out, tossed out a mockery about delusion, and dismissed every effort he'd made to reveal the truth behind his parents' deaths or report the corporation. Every complaint letter vanished into a void, replaced with one version they insisted was the truth. His parents had allegedly caused the accident through unlawful conduct and were accused of demanding compensation for the corporation's damages. He clenched his fist tighter as rain slapped down in a mechanical rhythm. An underling kicked him just to prove a point and reminded him that he should have signed the deal, taken the payout, and stopped chasing ghosts. Now his debt would snowball into $3,000 in monthly interest, set for full repayment in 3 years, with regular visits to collect. Violence baked in. Someone finally offered a spark of pity, tossed him a supposed fix, and proposed an interdimensional mining position to clear the balance. Still bleeding, Li Yi held on to the monster and remarked that even with death ahead, he wouldn't go quietly. He struck back and demanded to know why weakness had to equal surrender, then challenged whoever decided that the powerless were meant to vanish without resistance. The monster released him as blood sprayed outward, marking its first injury from the one it underestimated. He noticed the creature's stench, overwhelming and foul beyond belief. Suddenly, the statue's shadow made it known that it had once expected something of Li Yi, only to see it end in a worthless spiral. Still, despite the donut, Li Yi remarked that at least he'd managed to bite the beast and pointed out how easily the statue had crumbled. The shadow responded coldly, saying his only path forward now demanded a willing surrender of his body. Li Yi shut it down and remarked that death sounded better than submission, especially to something that twisted. The shadow laughed, amused by defiance that hadn't rotted yet. Then he demanded whether Li Yi truly believed he still had the right to refuse, as Li Yi lay on the ground, while glowing eyes signaled the shadow system activation. The monster flinched as black energy burst through its body. Its head slammed into the ground with a dull crunch. The shadow, now settled inside Li Yi, remarked that the one who had desecrated his statue had always been an insect. He never dropped a grudge once held. He barely moved as another monster howled behind him. He remarked that the noise grated on him. The monster had overstayed its welcome. It roared again as a purple aura flared toward it. It slashed with claws, but dissolved into the creeping haze. The shadow remarked once more on the stench that refused to leave. Next in line were the useless ones, and a miner asked nervously what came next, while another warned that he'd report him if touched. The shadow voiced interest in what Li Yi would choose, if the body were handed back. The miner pleaded for mercy, insisting that desperation alone had pushed him that far. Without their cruelty, he would have never awakened, and another added that he'd still managed to awaken despite their brutality. Li Yi narrowed his eyes and pressed if they truly expected gratitude for that. The miner brushed aside any need for thanks and demanded release as if nothing had occurred, while another echoed the same request. Li Yi noted that not only would he release them, he'd even offer support. The miner's eyes went wide, the mask falling away from his face. They coughed up blood and hurled curses his way. 2 miners backed off, trembling, and one pleaded for mercy, claiming innocence. Li Yi glanced at the power cells still operational and set them on the ground. The shadow urged him to discard his pointless mercy. That kind of compassion would only spell disaster. Li Yi snapped that no reminders were necessary, and the shadow warned that his will might collapse when survival was on the line. Stepping past the entrance, he looked ahead and recognized the hybrid presence. He hadn't expected such numbers beyond the cavern, and the shadow reminded him to relinquish control or face them alone. It sneered whether his legs had already begun to shake and urged him to reconsider, claiming he was nothing without its strength. Li Yi responded that the point had been made as his foot slammed against the ground. He didn't require repetition. He felt the fluidity in his body as he slipped past the first attack, every movement brimming with shonen main character precision minus the cliché catchphrase. The monster lunged again. A second dropped from above as he jerked back in surprise. His gaze sharpened. He pivoted fast and clean. Even his reflexes had broken past their former ceiling. The monster roared as he wheeled around to meet it, and the shadow noted that even combined, this was his peak, and it still failed to impress. But Li Yi surged forward anyway, absorbing the impact. He ordered the shadow to stay quiet as his fist struck the creature. Then he looked down at his hand, questioning the sudden spike in strength. He followed the monster's collapse and noted that his fists alone had left little effect. He wished for a weapon, and one began to form in his palm. He studied it and asked if the shadow had shaped it into a dagger. He shifted with the blade and declared it time for a test run. He cut through the monster and landed behind it. He stared ahead, unreadable, and confirmed that even hybrids could bleed. He had become an awakened. Then one of the monsters rammed into his shoulder. He struck back with a slicing arc, severing its head in a single motion. As more closed in, he acknowledged the arrival of his moment. He finally had the strength to fight back. Later, blood streaked the soil. Shattered monster remains littered the field. He lay on his back, chest rising and falling in short gasps. The fallen surrounded him. Then the system confirmed awakening was complete, and the human, Li Yi, had reached Class E. Later at the hospital, a nurse noted the absence of wounds, ailments, or unstable readings, then flagged the odd delay in his recovery, and the doctor clarified that awakened individuals consistently endured severe fatigue and needed time for their bodies to adjust. She identified him as one of the awakened and inquired about his level, and he informed her she was rushing and remarked that they would address that matter once he regained consciousness. He directed her toward the next room, and she responded that they ought to linger a bit longer since he looked so striking. As they stepped out, the shadow questioned the purpose of involving humans, branded them an inferior breed, and resented being shackled to an E-class rank. And given its power and lineage, it should have qualified for at least B-class, if not outright S-class, but now it remained trapped in an E-class vessel. Although the fact that an E-class from Zone X had triggered the shadow system and summoned it on the first try offered minor intrigue, yet it remained a disappointment since an E-class could not contain even a 10,000th of its genuine strength. Yi Li raised the issue of whether it was the same entity again and demanded clarity about its identity and motivations behind the repeated interference. Shanguje told him to focus and introduced himself as Shangguji, sovereign of all realms and hells from the ancient supreme lineage, then commanded him to relinquish his body and promised opulent rewards once the throne was reclaimed from traitorous kin. Li Yi dismissed the claim of ancient descent and judged the name Shangguji absurd, since he had never encountered it before and considered him a cockroach-like abomination, unwilling to hand over his body to something so repellent and malformed, even in death. Shangguji quietly repeated the insults cockroach, vile and grotesque, then questioned how a mere human could hurl such slurs and declared that no more discussion would follow, commanding him to surrender his body since it served no better use. Li Yi questioned the fixation, speculated whether Shangguji aimed to inhabit him like a parasitic entity and wondered if it harbored obsession over his form, chose not to provoke it, but mulled over the chance of forced takeover, recognized the danger, and debated its gender. He dismissed the theory based on its appearance and weighed the choice between a dignified death or an attempt at diplomacy while measuring the risk of escalation and computing potential outcomes such as annihilation, demonic consumption, or full erasure. Shangguji barked at him to stop and demanded an explanation for the nonsense he kept spouting. He questioned why he had ended up with someone who leaned into such deranged notions and voiced frustration at being saddled with an E-class human, noting that if things had not grown so desperate, even an old mutt would have been preferable. Shangguji gave Li Yi 3 days and warned that failure to reach D-class by then would end in obliteration. Li Yi noted that the hospital had vanished and questioned his current location, and Shangguji revealed they now stood before the gate of the infernal realm housing the E-class trial called the Insect Nest. Every clansman could enter it once after reaching maturity, and Li Yi pointed out that the possession had reset his trial eligibility. A marker identified the monster as a shield armor beetle, and Li Yi repeated the name and wondered how he recognized the species. And Shangguji explained that the shadow system would supply intel from its archive and told him to adapt. Li Yi echoed the term shadow system while gripping his weapon tightly. Then he launched a sequence of slashes. As the beetle charged, the blows closed in and Li Yi muttered about its speed. It opened its jaws and released a deep roar. As it squared off, Li Yi closed the gap and observed that the weak point was located at its rear. He spun midair and struck clean on its back. The beetle's body stayed upright while he landed. Its leg lashed out and he raised his sword to intercept as sparks burst from the clash. He clicked his tongue as the impact shoved him backward. The beetle bellowed again, and he noted the durability of its shell while Shangguji dismissed him as useless. He questioned whether brute strength was his sole tactic, and Li Yi snapped that his methods were none of his concern, and Shangguji shot back not to beg for help if he failed. Li Yi unleashed another series of blows and cursed the insect for lacking a soft spot. Its defenses remained unbroken. Then the beetle countered with a crushing blow that flung him across the field. He slammed into a wall and let out a groan. Shangguji mocked him as a pathetic E-class while a green slime surfaced on his shoulder, and he muttered that this was it. He noticed green fluid leaking from the joint in the beetle's leg. The monster reared for another strike, and he remarked that the substance was its blood. At last, he had found its weakness. The beetle's attack plunged fast. Li Yi remarked they could finally pinpoint the real weakling. Shangguji questioned whether that counted as shadow sense. Li Yi struck the beetle's leg and called for it to snap. Shangguji remarked that snapping a single leg after all that effort felt pointless. Li Yi replied that losing a front leg left it unable to guard its weak point, but he still lacked a proper weapon. A spear took shape as he declared this one would serve. He urged the beetle to rise while crashing into its underside. There was a reason the bug refused to move. He hit its abdomen and noted the weak point lay there. He muttered between gasps that he had won, while Shangguji commented on how winded he looked after defeating a simple E-rank shield armor beetle. Suddenly, a surge of power coursed through him, while Shangguji labeled him ignorant and explained it came from an energy stone capable of raising ability level, and Li Yi remarked it felt like collecting an experience pack. He then noted something closing in but failed to see anything. Shangguji questioned why he didn't just use shadow sense, and Li Yi countered with a question about what that even meant. Shangguji explained he only needed to direct shadow energy into his eyes to activate the shadow sense skill, and Li Yi then meditated in silence within a glow of purple light. Afterward, he unlocked shadow sense level 1, activated it, and remarked that it had worked. A monster burst forward as sharp projectiles sliced through the air toward him. One nearly caught his legs. It slammed into the cave wall, which hissed under the poison. He remarked that the darting figures moved too fast. They came again. He spun and dodged with force. He questioned whether shadow sense was useless and why his vision remained unclear, while Shangguji replied that the issue wasn't the skill, but his lack of strength. Li Yi repeated the line about his weakness and resolved to draw in more energy. Shangguji commented on how unusual it was for a mere E-rank to handle shadow energy so smoothly, and that things were becoming far more entertaining. Meanwhile, Li Yi remarked that the two enemies were an E-rank stinger shooter, known for launching venomous spines from a distance, and an E-rank warp reaper bug, the one nicknamed the Head Reaper, and Shangguji noted that he already seemed in sync with the knowledge base. Li Yi told him to hold on and remarked on the overwhelming numbers. Shangguji mentioned the human saying about seeing one cockroach, meaning the shadows were already full of them, and Li Yi muttered about just how many there really were while standing surrounded. The monsters charged, hissing. Shangguji noted he was clever enough to choose a position that prevented being flanked. Li Yi addressed all of them. They should back off as he sent a wave of purple energy outward. Shangguji remarked that he had already triggered the second stage of shadow sense. It was a pleasant surprise from someone stuck in E-class, while the system confirmed that shadow sense level 2 had been unlocked, enabling every enemy heartbeat to register as a death knell. Li Yi registered that the bug's movements had slowed to nearly half speed. He speculated that the purple glow might signal a vulnerability, and the system logged that the stinger shooter's weak point had been confirmed, while Shangguji remarked this perk came with reaching Shadow Sense's second stage. Once weak points emerged, attacks could bypass defenses, and Li Yi noticed that every one of these creatures had theirs located underneath. He triggered Shadow Spike as several Shadow Lances erupted from the ground, skewering enemies and triggering area damage. The system tracked the D-Class breakthrough progression, and he calculated that each shooter added only 0.7% toward the total. Now that their vulnerabilities had surfaced, this cleanup should finish quickly. They needed to eliminate everything in a single sweep, and a string of breakthrough percentages followed his strikes, catching him off guard with how sharply Shadow Sense Level 2 had honed his precision. Then a green blur shot past, and he demanded to know what it was, while Shangguji observed his reflexes remained sharp, though his mind lagged behind. Li Yi confirmed that his vision had cleared, and identified the intruder as a Warp Reaper bug. His shadow dagger extended, and Shangguji reeled at the sudden transformation into a whip. Li Yi declared capture and snared it midair with the shadow whip. The bug tried another leap, and the system registered the Warp Reaper bug's weakness as he lopped off its head. Suddenly, a wave of enemies charged with stingers primed. He gripped his weapon and muttered that if they enjoyed shooting so much, he would hit them with Entangle. They could try firing now without a rear end, which oozed classic petty villain flair. As the bugs dropped, the D-Class breakthrough reached 12.1%. He barked for them to get down, while tearing multiple airborne bugs from the sky with shadow tendrils. Shangguji noted that he was finally starting to resemble someone worthy of this power, though the posture still looked absurd. The gift of Shadow Sense massively boosted his awareness, reaction speed, raw strength, and mastery over shadow energy, living up to its name. It also consumed mental energy viciously, and this was the cost exacted by the shadow. He remained at E-Class and was already approaching collapse, and Li Yi realized his vision had started to blur. He confirmed that he would never squander the power he had finally gained and would channel it into vengeance. He questioned how he could fall here, and the countdown kept ticking. Those bastards were part of the NG group. They had buried the truth behind his parents' deaths and shamelessly forced him into mining to repay a forged debt. It had all happened because he'd been powerless, just another regular person. But now he had the strength to overturn everything and would never back down and would see vengeance through. Not long after, corpses littered the battlefield as he resolved to drag those pompous bastards into the abyss. He would make them kneel at his parents' graves and beg for forgiveness, and the D-Class breakthrough progress ticked up to 95.4%. Shangguji commented that human hatred resonated uncannily well with the shadow system and even nourished shadow energy. The promised time was almost over and warned that he needed to move faster. Shangguji questioned whether he truly meant to release all the shadow energy in one go and asked if he wasn't worried his body might rupture, and Li Yi confirmed that he stood just one step from breakthrough. As long as power was close enough to seize, he would risk everything, and the final moment reached zero. Li Yi lunged through the air, his strike tearing through a swarm of bugs. They crumbled without resistance. And the D-rank breakthrough progress meter hit 100%, triggering an automatic rank up to D-rank. He pulled in ragged breaths while Shangguji acknowledged the narrow margin of success and welcomed him into D-rank. Something on the ground drew his eye. He studied a weapon and wondered if it qualified as one, while Shangguji mentioned the bug nest had originally functioned as a beginner trial zone, and the dagger probably qualified as A-rank by human standards. He clasped it and questioned whether it could even count as a dagger, remarking that his tribe must have been composed of giants. Shangguji noted that compared to his shadow energy, these weapons amounted to little, but Li Yi countered that wasn't quite the case while gathering the loot. Shangguji asked whether he meant to repurpose them, and Li Yi replied that he planned to sell them. However, only D-rank awakeners had clearance to sell equipment, so the first stop had to be the registration hall. Later, Li Yi reacted with disbelief over an E-Class result, wondering how it could possibly register that low. The receptionist explained that although his physical stats impressed, no energy fluctuations were detected, so the system could only classify him as E-rank. He was already signed up as a miner, and E-rank awakeners qualified for a 15% pay bump. As they left, Li Yi remarked flatly that the shadow system really was unbeatable, full Madara mode with zero compatibility for chakra sensors, while Shangguji noted that humans lacked the means to detect shadow energy. Li Yi responded that being invisible might come in handy, although it definitely made selling gear harder. Later that day, he arrived at the black market where hushed, off-the-record deals went down, and Shang-Guji remarked that black suited the shadow system well. As he stepped inside, one man commented on the stink of ore slag, another guessed it was mining ventilation cloth, and a third remarked how rare it was to see a miner show up. Shang-Guji muttered that humans were pathetic for worshipping metal, decorated with gemstones, and he almost pitied them. Without warning, a salesman barked at him to leave, questioning why a miner had wandered in and warning that if anything got damaged, he'd never afford the cost. Li Yi pushed back, asking if that was how customers got welcomed, while the salesman snapped that someone looking like him had no business affording anything in the place. Li Yi replied that nothing in the shop seemed worth wanting anyway, and told them to get their appraiser to look at the greatsword. At that moment, Su Qing voiced her annoyance to Zhou Ting, a D-rank awakener. She asked why he had dragged her to such a foul-smelling dump. The salesman's tone flipped instantly as he greeted Zhou Ting, asking if he had something valuable to sell, and Zhou Ting responded that he had picked up a decent sword from the Gate of Exile. The salesman identified it as the Wind Howl sword, noting its attack bonus and popularity among D ranks. Meanwhile, Li Yi addressed Su Qing directly, catching her and the others off guard. Not long ago, she had accused him of burning through the compensation from his parents' deaths, saying he should have moved on instead of piling on debt, and that someone like him had no right to come looking for her again and waste her time. Now, Zhou Ting asked if she knew him, and she replied that she wouldn't be familiar with some low-tier miner, assuming he was just a fan since she had minor celebrity status. Zhou Ting asked if he had really used her name, then remarked that the market standards had collapsed and questioned whether letting nobodies in might hurt his brand. He pointed him toward the scrapyard at the far end of the street and suggested he take his junk there before they closed. He barked for him to get lost and swung his sword. The blade shattered on contact and Zhou Ting froze, unable to process what had just happened. Li Yi noted that apparently the real garbage had been the sword itself. Su Qing stared, wondering how that could happen since the sword could slice through iron and carried a high price tag, while Zhou Ting cursed. He erupted in rage, demanding to know if he had a death wish. Li Yi grumbled that the dodge came too late. Zhou Ting observed that his reflexes held up well enough, but he adjusted his stance and launched a second strike. He pushed forward, unleashing a barrage of kicks with a sharp challenge about his speed now. Li Yi remarked that the assault crawled compared to the Bugnest trials. Zhou Ting recalled that he was nothing more than a miner, even beneath E rank. He was a D rank, yet snapped out a demand for why he still missed every hit. Suddenly, Li Yi triggered his entangle skill. Zhou Ting bellowed that miners belonged in the pits they'd crawled out of, but Li Yi threw it back with a crack, asking if dogs should crawl back to their streets instead. Then he jerked the shadow whip taut. Zhou Ting slammed into the ground and let out a pained grunt. Su Qing cried out in alarm while Zhou Ting staggered up and spat a curse. Li Yi remarked that he really did seem to enjoy being called a dog. Zhou Ting erupted in fury and charged again, flinging out a demand about whether he had a death wish. But Wang Defa stepped in with a sharp order to stop, and Zhou Ting halted, taken aback. Wang Defa, a D-rank himself, noted that while he was a regular, throwing punches in his store crossed the line. But Su Qing gestured toward Li Yi and fired back that he broke Zhou Ting's sword first, sparking the whole mess. Wang Defa blinked and mulled over whether a miner actually managed that. He followed up, checking if the blade got sliced by the one Li Yi held. Li Yi replied that he struck first and threw in a rhetorical jab about how that made the sword snapping his fault. Wang Defa turned to Zhou Ting and looked to confirm the story. He murmured that the kid's blade probably wasn't some knockoff and floated the idea of settling things the usual way, which Zhou Ting accepted by choosing the cash and leaving the sword behind. Wang Defa faced Li Yi and offered to mediate, citing Zhou Ting's trust. He asked to inspect the sword first and Li Yi passed it over. He raised his eyebrows once it hit his palm. He pointed out the blade had to weigh over 100 pounds and noted that Li Yi held it like a twig, then mused if awakening was in play and figured he needed to gauge the boy's ceiling. He demanded to know where a miner picked up something like that. Li Yi lobbed back a quip about how the black market never asked for ID. Wang Defa responded with a shrug, chalking it up to curiosity, and said it was no big deal if Li Yi kept it to himself, and Li Yi wondered if this was just another test. He commented there was no secret, just something he found while mining, and Wang Defa nodded, calling it typical miner luck. He mentioned that the blade looked durable, but lacked any enchantments or special features, and pegged the value at a few hundred. while Zhou Ting's former weapon had been worth over 2 million. He acknowledged that Li Yi was still just a minor and times were rough, so he offered to buy the sword, cover Zhou Ting's damages himself, and tie up the loose ends. He figured he might as well call it charity and turn to Zhou Ting for his input. Zhou Ting agreed to back off thanks to Boss Wang stepping in, and Su Qing threw out a question about how a minor could afford 2 million, then pressed him about the car he promised her. Zhou Ting replied that selling the miner's organs would do the trick, and the woman responded that it sounded good to her. Li Yi picked up that they had already hashed everything out, and Wang Defa asked if he had an objection. But Li Yi commented that the moment should be savored. He was not the one who needed to worry. Several men charged at him while one barked out an order to bring him down, all intensity and zero planning. Wang Defa caught the pointlessness of the mess right away and advised heading to the tea room to wait it out, and Zhou Ting agreed without resistance. But when a man sailed through the air, they instinctively recoiled in stunned silence. Wang Defa reminded Biao to move with caution and flagged the risk that anything broken wouldn't be coming out of his wallet. But Li Yi had already knocked them backward through a barrage of kicks. One even went careening toward Zhou Ting. He knocked the guy aside mid-motion, tossing out that all the mining had done his body some favors, flinging weight like a player who just finished a dungeon run fueled by Saitama's training regimen. Li Yi turned cold and mentioned it was his turn now. Su Qing puzzled over when miners started moving like that, and Zhou Ting acknowledged the guy had skills, at least enough to take out a few bottom feeders. But against a D-rank awakened, he still ranked as a complete non-factor. Li Yi raised his hand without a flicker of doubt. He struck, sending him skidding backward, blood smearing from his mouth. Zhou Ting exploded with a burst of energy, roaring that his father had never hit him, and demanding to know who had the nerve to slap him. He flung the attack, declaring he would end him. But the hit met Li Yi's purple barrier and erupted on contact. Zhou Ting demanded to know what blocked it, and described it as crashing into an invisible wall. Li Yi responded that if his father had never done the honors, he would gladly pick up the slack, and Zhou Ting yelled at him to back off while Su Qing pressed on how a minor could overpower a D-rank awakened. Then Zhou Ting found himself locked inside Shadow Manifestation Spiderweb, and Su Qing screamed again, demanding to know what was going on. Zhou Ting asked if he was an awakened and demanded to know his rank, whether C or B. Li Yi answered that he was an E-rank minor officially registered with the guild, and Zhou Ting flat out refused to accept it. Li Yi raised his hand while Zhou Ting warned him that contact would mean going against Brother Panther and the Black Panther gang. Li Yi brushed it off by saying the Black Panther gang were nothing but loan sharks. He repeated Black Panther gang and Brother Panther flatly while launching the attack, triggering another scream from Su Qing. He kicked them away cleanly, sending them crashing across the room and treating them like disposable mobs locked in taunt cooldown. Zhou Ting coughed up blood from the impact. Li Yi added that what he loathed most were parasites fattened off loan shark schemes. Suddenly, Wang Defa shrieked that he deserved death and swung a weapon from behind. Purple energy intercepted the blow and knocked him back as a sharp cry escaped. Zhou Ting stumbled and stammered that everything had been a big misunderstanding, offering 100,000 yuan and suggesting they bury the hatchet and get friendly. Li Yi checked whether his face only rated 2,000 yuan per slap, and Zhou Ting hiked it to 500,000 yuan before yelling he would pay 1 million if the slap stopped. But Li Yi laid down the math, stating the 50 slaps were just interest and the principal still remained. Zhou Ting raised a card and screamed that he had 5 million and would surrender it all because it was everything he owned. Li Yi noted the card belonged to NG Group's VIP network and concluded the man had been collecting debts for NG Group for years. And since they killed his parents and treated him like a hound, he would let him crawl and wait for the real target instead. And Zhou Ting swore up and down it was all he had. As he hacked blood on the floor, Li Yi stated that the Black Panther gang had siphoned millions from him across the years, and this counted as a token repayment. Su Qing asked if he was alright, and Zhou Ting echoed her in disbelief, shouting that the man was just a minor, and she admitted she never expected him to turn out this strong. But Zhou Ting snapped that if she had not said the man was a minor, he never would have lowered his guard. His money would not be stripped that easily, and he told him to wait while he made a call. On the other end, Brother Panther prompted him to explain. Zhou Ting frantically pleaded for backup, claiming some kid had swiped the sword meant for him and was now targeting their gang. And Brother Panther ordered him to send everything he had on the kid. An underling asked what should be done with the others once the goods were recovered, and he asked whether any of them still breathed. The underling grinned and confirmed the area was clean, channeling that Zero Squad-style purge energy. He finished the job and walked off while Brother Panther claimed responsibility for the kid Zhou Ting had described, regardless of whether he returned alive or not. Elsewhere, the receptionist inquired whether any assistance was needed, sounding routine enough. Li Yi introduced himself as an E-rank awakened and mentioned he was hoping to find a mission that suited his level. A man scoffed and mocked whether some E-rank trash had wandered into the wrong zone, while another chimed in that the lowest missions available were D-rank and mocked if he had come to die, earning some snickers. A woman found it hilarious that an E-rank even opened his mouth, and another man remarked that E-ranks lived off scraps tossed their way and dismissed them as disgusting parasites. The receptionist ordered him out and explained that E-ranks waited outside until a team accepted them, while someone else threw in directions toward a door next to the garbage dump and announced that trash belonged with trash. Li Yi mulled over the fact that he'd just gotten 5 million, only for the loan sharks to snatch it all. And with his balance drained to zero, getting a mission was now the top priority. Suddenly, a man blinked in shock as someone new entered the room. 2 men broke into nervous sweat and stared wide-eyed, blurting disbelief. 2 others stiffened, with one clutching his chest and the other pitching forward in alarm. One muttered about the crushing pressure. Another pegged it as at least B rank, and a third admitted they couldn't shift half a step under the weight of a B rank's aura. She held a serious expression while a man behind her clutched his chest and instinctively backed away. Meanwhile, Li Yi kept quiet as the crowd looked stunned, and one man questioned why a B rank would bother showing up there. Li Yi registered her powerful aura and noted that she resembled a delicate rich girl, considered whether she was holding back bloodlust, and picked up on how she struck a balance between flash and control. Then, a man announced that the D-rank Beast Abyss needed a D-rank awakened to serve as a miner and called for volunteers. One person questioned how an E-rank could remain upright under B-rank pressure. Another pointed out that their own knees were shaking and wondered why the E-rank wasn't already collapsed, and someone else observed that he'd even stepped forward. Li Yi accepted that it must be just him. On the other hand, Qin registered mild interest in how a mere miner remained steady under her B-rank aura, while the receptionist recognized her from Dragon Gate's 3rd district and offered to escort her to the D-rank awakened. Qin declined the offer and pointed at Li Yi, prompting a startled reaction from the receptionist. He objected that the man hadn't registered and skipped the line, calling it a violation of the rules. Qin declared that she was the rules and confirmed she meant him, which the receptionist acknowledged. Then, one man gestured and indicated her path, while another wondered aloud about the miner's background since it was the first time Miss Qin had handpicked anyone. Later, a minotaur lifted its arms to strike. The bard played a wind instrument. The minotaur took the full hit from the melody and its head detonated. Li Yi evaluated the team as well-rounded, with frontline DPS and support roles, while the swordsman and warrior handled multiple foes. The group moved well together under the B-rank Awakens lead, and everything looked under control. Still, he watched with concern. The Minotaurs below and the Beast Abyss exceeded what D-rank should handle, which raised the question of why no one else seemed to notice. Shanguzhi informed him that his shadow sense had reached its 2nd stage and that his awareness now far outpaced the others, while Li Yi suspected the rich girl must have noticed too, unless she already knew, and had a reason to keep it quiet as the group descended further into the cavern's gloom. A party member quietly mentioned that intel pointed to the starlight crystal vein being located inside. Qin instructed Li Yi to follow, and he complied, wondering why she'd drag a miner into danger. The ominous atmosphere thickened, and he began to question whether she cared about the miner or her team, or whether she placed full confidence in her B-rank ability to keep everyone safe. His foot pressed forward onto the cavern floor. The party shouted her name as she and Li Yi plunged into a massive pit. Moments later, they landed amid scattered debris and chunks of rock. Li Yi looked up, clearly surprised. There, a D-rank minotaur emerged with a roar, and the 2 of them stood ready. Li Yi figured she was finally taking action as she stepped in front of him. Qin stood steady, sword in hand, facing forward. But she stayed quiet, wearing a serious face with a single bead of sweat sliding down. She backed off and claimed he should go first while she would cover him, and he pushed back, wondering why a miner like him had to lead. Qin flushed deep red and lowered her head slightly, shivering without a word. She insisted she didn't care and urged him to go, but Li Yi challenged how an E-rank miner was supposed to handle things if even a B-rank like her wouldn't lift a finger, and why his life should hang in the balance for a miner's wages. Qin broke into tears and threw out an offer of 1 million yuan, pressing him to move and deal with the threat. Li Yi glanced down at her and admitted the money had his attention. He figured he might as well give it a shot while lifting his weapon. He advanced, ready to jump in. 3 minotaurs bellowed and charged, and he welcomed them in stride. He flicked his gaze to the side, eyes widening. Qin screamed as a minotaur lunged at her, and Li Yi figured this could cost him his payday. Out of nowhere, a barrier formed and blasted the minotaurs away. Li Yi remarked she'd been holding out, so maybe he'd been stressing over nothing. But then a minotaur let out a roar and lifted its weapon. While she stared up in alarm, Li Yi brought his sword down on it. He cleaved the creature from above. He muttered that they were asking for it and threw a word in Qin's direction. But she bolted, throwing the mess in his lap, leaving him stumped. Hemmed in by monsters, he rolled with it and cut them down one after another. Meanwhile, Qin raced through the tunnel, gasping for breath. She muttered it had to be safe now, but a minotaur crept up behind her without a sound. She turned, eyes wide, sweat beating up again. She muttered that they shouldn't be ignoring her aura. The minotaur raised its weapon. Li Yi figured it was weird she panicked despite having power in reserve. She let out a frantic yell and lifted her arm as her bracelet glowed red. A surge of force blasted the minotaur back down the passage. Li Yi stood there, unfazed, as the creature tumbled away. Qin's bracelet shattered on impact. Li Yi wondered if it was some kind of defensive gear and suspected that earlier move hadn't come from her core strength. He floated the idea that she might be an awakened support type, and she gave a non-committal answer. But she warned him to keep quiet, and Li Yi mentioned that would cost her extra. Then he brought up how weird it was that the minotaurs only ever targeted her. Li Yi activated his shadow sense with sharp focus. He then realized that Luden had been masking his presence the entire time and figured it explained why he couldn't sense him earlier, while the Minotaur's erratic movements clearly came from those strange waves. Suddenly, Qin Ziyin pulled his attention away. He remarked that they just kept coming, one after another. He cursed inwardly, recognizing that more and more Minotaurs were swarming them. Yet since he couldn't risk accidentally hurting Qin Ziyin, he had no choice but to avoid using area skills. And if he couldn't break through this situation soon, he would eventually get worn down. That was when he realized she was actually Luden's target. He figured they should just give him exactly that. He reminded her that she had already used both her protective artifacts, and since she was a non-combatant awakened, she better stay sharp and avoid getting ambushed. She pressed him, demanding why he would say something like that out loud. Suddenly, Luden crept up behind her without a sound. He brooded over how a lowly miner had nearly ruined his plan, and decided he would finish her off himself, since she was a defenseless awakened who had lost her protective artifact. She could lay the blame on her father for that. But Li Yi's sword suddenly slashed out toward him. Luden's arm flew into the air, and Qin Ziyin froze in confusion when she glanced back. Luden himself stared wide-eyed as his severed arm crashed to the ground in front of him. Li Yi declared that it was him. He was the one controlling the Minotaurs using subsonic waves, and Qin Ziyin instantly recognized Luden, a D-rank controller-type bard. Luden chuckled and admitted he never thought he'd lose to a miner, claiming he had simply been careless. But he warned Li Yi not to think he had won yet. He drew in the life force of the fallen Minotaurs scattered across the ground. He also siphoned the vitality of the ones still standing, draining them dry. He promised to show them the true terror of a control-type awakened. Li Yi noted grimly that the aura he released was C-rank, and Qin Ziyin pointed out that he was using the beast's life force to amplify his strength. She then spotted the lava nearby and asked if he was evolving them into C-rank lava minotaurs. Li Yi questioned if that meant he was jumping directly from D-rank to C-rank, and grudgingly admitted that even he had to be impressed by such a power boost. Luden transformed into a lava minotaur and let out an ear-splitting roar. He lunged forward and struck out with his fist. Li Yi unleashed his shadow energy, forging a shield to intercept the attack and protect Qin Ziyin. But the explosive force behind it blasted them backward with brutal intensity. Li Yi acknowledged that this was the destructive might of a C-rank, and even the two of them together wouldn't be enough. Qin Ziyin called out that he was hurt. Suddenly, Luden summoned a massive axe into his grip. Li Yi instantly grabbed Qin Ziyin's hand. He urged her to hold on tight. She grew alarmed as she saw Luden's axe swinging down toward her. Li Yi immediately unleashed a skill that coiled around Luden's wrist, locking the weapon in place. Luden barked in frustration, demanding why it wouldn't move, while Li Yi gritted out that he couldn't hold it for long. She needed to hurry and leave. He insisted she listen carefully, and once she reached the maze, she had to run straight ahead without stopping. She asked about him, worried he wasn't coming with her. He told her he had to hold Luden back to buy her time to escape. She needed to hide herself well because he promised he would come find her soon. After all, he reminded himself with grim resolve, she was his million yuan lottery ticket. Luden cursed loudly, roaring out his demand to know where the hell they hid. Li Yi, casual as ever, pressed if he was seriously out here looking for someone. Luden barked back, fuming, demanding to know where Qin Xian was. He swung his massive axe, shattering the platform beneath where Li Yi sat without hesitation. Li Yi calmly remarked that he should take a wild guess. He slashed his sword low, cutting behind his knees in one smooth motion. But shock rippled through him when the strike failed to leave even a scratch. He grimly wondered if even splitting the cracks in the rock wouldn't be enough to break through. Luden let out a harsh, guttural laugh and mocked him, asking if he was dumb enough to try cutting stone with a dagger. Li Yi figured dealing with this massive stretch of lava was going to be a serious headache. He decided he should lure him into a more open area first, but Luden sneered and called him a pathetic little rat. He taunted, asking if running was the only trick he actually knew. Li Yi locked in, thinking strength didn't matter as he activated his shadow sense. There's always a weak point, he reminded himself, while Luden declared that once he killed him, he'd go find that woman. The bastard deserved to die just for spitting out those words. Luden cursed again while Li Yi caught a sharp glimmer of realization. He found it. He shifted in a blur behind him and swung his blade with precision, but Li Yi's nerves spiked with sudden alarm. Luden scoffed, demanding if he honestly believed he wouldn't notice the plan. He declared that in the face of absolute power, every one of his little tricks meant nothing. Li Yi reeled under the crushing force and wondered bitterly if this was really something a C-rank could wield. Luden taunted that they'd see where he'd try running this time. Li Yi steadied himself, knowing he had to wait for the perfect opening. Luden jeered again, asking if he'd finally stopped running and if he was seriously trying to cut him with a dagger. He mocked that it was pointless anyway since that scrap metal of his couldn't even scratch him, while Li Yi narrowed his focus, ready to strike the second the next attack came. The moment arrived. Suddenly, the pool of lava behind Luden erupted, releasing a violent burst of steam. Li Yi stiffened in shock. The heat slammed into him so brutal that even shadow energy couldn't fully shield him from the blistering temperature. Luden smirked, remarking that he was sharper than he looked, and Li Yi realized the guy actually knew how to guard his weak spot. Luden admitted that although he didn't know how he figured it out, he had indeed found his weakness. Too bad it wouldn't help, because the heat there was still over 2,000 degrees, so he should just spill where Qin Xian was. And maybe he'd let him live. Li Yi spat back that he was nothing but a traitor who sold out his own kind and snapped if he really thought someone like him could ever be trusted. Luden's expression darkened as he declared he was begging for death. Luden barked furiously that the bastard should just swallow that damn axe already and quit darting around like a coward, spitting out a demand that he fight head-on. Li Yi unleashed his shadow manifestation, Chainblade, with a sharp, cutting motion. He remarked lightly that it almost felt like he wasn't even dodging at all. He figured this was the opening he needed and triggered his shadow manifestation, Whip Dart, without the slightest pause. The daggers spun midair, curving sharply as they whipped back to stab straight at Luden's exposed weak point. But the molten pool beside them burst violently, blasting a wave of scalding steam into the air. It instantly melted every single dagger before they could even graze their target. Luden let out a jagged laugh and mocked that it was completely pointless, while Li Yi muttered internally that this was turning into a real headache. Luden scoffed harshly that he should just throw in the towel already. Li Yi realized fast that his shadow energy was draining at a brutal pace, and if it kept up like this, things would spiral ugly. So he debated calling for backup. Then he shot the thought down on the spot. He refused to ever surrender his body again, even if it meant clawing his way through to his last breath. Besides, killing that C-rank would rack up a ridiculous amount of experience points. He lunged hard toward the bubbling lava with his spear clamped tight in his grip. He swore to himself he couldn't afford to let this chance slip away. He'd tear through no matter what. Luden had to die. Luden's HP crashed straight into critical range, triggering his berserker rage in a violent burst. Luden roared savagely for him to get lost, while Li Yi wondered what the hell suddenly shoved him into this frenzy. A bone-jarring impact slammed into him, launching his body into the wall, blood splattering from his mouth. Luden growled through gritted teeth that a damn miner managed to push him this far, while Li Yi cursed under his breath at the blistering heat, his wounds searing raw from the burning effect lacing each strike. Luden muttered bitterly that this was as far as his body could carry him. Out of nowhere, Li Yi felt his heart hammering so violently it shook his ribs. He questioned why the shadow inside him suddenly surged, wild and stronger than ever before. Shangguji explained calmly that the energy had always been there, but his body couldn't channel it before without the brutal tempering from extreme heat. Without realizing it, he had stumbled into unlocking an entirely new form of shadow energy. Li Yi declared with grit that the energy was stitching his wounds together as he awakened the shadow enhancement, and Shangguji clarified bluntly that this went way beyond simple healing. Luden stared, rattled and wide-eyed, watching how fast he was mending, while also sensing his aura sharpen and grow far more dangerous than before. He refused to give him time to recover fully. Li Yi vaulted back with sharp precision and dodged the incoming strike clean. Luden staggered mentally, baffled at how he was matching a speed tripled by berserker rage. He thought it was insane and questioned if this monster was truly just E-rank. Snarling viciously, he declared he had drowned the whole damn area. But Li Yi stood unshaken, lips curling into a cold razor-edged smirk. Luden yelled furiously that he'd let the lava reduce him to ashes. Yet his face twisted in raw confusion when Li Yi stepped out untouched. He stood motionless, cloaked in writhing shadow energy, poised like a predator above the molten surface. He demanded if this was shadow enhancement, and as he registered how terrifying the basic level already was, he silently wondered what chaos the maximum tier could unleash. He mocked sharply if that was really all the power Luden had to throw. Luden barked back that there was no way this could be real, while Li Yi taunted coldly that he sure seemed to be having fun swinging that axe. Now, it was finally his turn. Luden and Li Yi charged at each other like two storms colliding. Li Yi then braced himself for an opening and swung his blades with sharp precision. He unleashed a flurry of vicious slashing strikes at Luden's arm, channeling every ounce of his shadow enhancement into the assault. Luden froze in shock when he saw his hand shattered into fragments before his eyes. He spat out that Li Yi was a little bastard. Li Yi crossed his arms tightly, steadying himself for a counterattack, while Luden lunged forward, reaching out to grab him. He wondered if charged attacks also unleashed ranged damage while in shadow enhancement mode. Luden scoffed coldly as fresh limbs sprouted where his arms had been moments ago. He declared that as long as lava was around him, he could regenerate endlessly, making Li Yi's attacks completely useless. Li Yi asked if it was truly endless regeneration. He doubted it immediately, pointing out that Luden's energy already felt weaker. Luden then barked at him to come at him again. He lost his limbs once more, yet he roared that they should go again. He lunged forward aggressively, shouting once more for them to go again. Then his voice cracked with confusion as he demanded to know how this was happening. Li Yi calmly explained that his energy had hit its limit, so he should just give up. Luden urged him to wait, to hold on, pointing out that they had no grudge against each other and didn't need to fight to the death. But Li Yi countered bluntly that Qin Xian was paying him $1 million to keep her safe. Luden scoffed that money wasn't an issue, insisting Li Yi should just hand her over. Once they returned to Wrong City, he could forget the $1 million because he'd offer $5 million instead. Li Yi pressed if they'd really be back in Wrong City, sneering that Luden would likely betray him afterward, maybe even bring people to hunt him down, and he could lose his life for trusting him. Luden snapped that there was no way he'd do that and demanded what kind of backstabbing scumbag Li Yi took him for. Li Yi smirked faintly and said he just gave him an idea. Turning a traitor like him over to Qin Shaoshang would fetch a much higher reward, and by saving Qin's daughter while capturing her attacker, he'd earn the boss of Dragon Gate 3 Street's personal favor, which was worth far more than $5 million. Luden cursed internally, realizing that if Qin Shaoshang ever caught him, he'd be tortured to death, and the organization wouldn't spare his family either. He then hissed that if things had reached this point, Li Yi shouldn't blame him for what came next. Shang Guzhi suddenly snapped, demanding how the hell Luden possessed a prison gate fragment. He warned that if the fragment was destroyed, the Beast Realm would lose its only connection to the outside world. The portal would vanish, and they'd all be trapped forever. Luden retorted that they had forced his hand, But before he could act further, Li Yi snatched the fragment right out of his grip. He moved so fast that Luden couldn't even react before it was gone. Li Yi bluntly remarked that he should die. Luden screamed out in raw pain. Shadow energy exploded violently from his body. His lifeless body collapsed to the ground, and a gleaming core rolled free from it. Li Yi commented that it made sense now why the previous Minotaurs didn't have energy cores since they were all here. And right then, the system chimed in, notifying him that his Shadow Sense 2 had been upgraded to Ultimate Shadow Sense. He froze for a moment, baffled, when he suddenly felt the ground rumbling beneath him. Shangguji explained with urgency that without the Lava Minotaur's energy keeping things in check, the Beast Realm was crumbling apart. Moments later, at the Beast Abyss exit, one party member cursed under his breath and muttered that it was terrifying. Another complained that nobody knew there would be earthquakes in there. Another breathed out shakily that they barely made it out alive, while Qin Xian admitted with surprise that she had no idea Li Yi was that strong. He was way beyond E rank. She pressed him on whether he'd be interested in joining Dragon Gate 3 streets and mentioned that her father would value a fighter like him highly. He responded coolly that he wasn't looking to join any organization for now, and regarding his abilities, asked her to keep that between them. She accepted that with a nod and told him to think it over anyway. She handed him his million with a casual remark that he earned it, and he replied that it was a pleasure doing business with her. Then he brought up one more thing, asking whether Dragon Gate 3 streets dealt in weapons like that sword. She examined it and remarked that the blade had no energy fluctuations, but the material was phenomenal, so she'd need to take it back for appraisal, promising that whatever it was worth, he'd get every penny. He acknowledged that sounded fine and said he'd wait to hear from her, quietly noting to himself that she seemed pretty sharp when it came to weapons. And if her eye was as good as it looked, he might have just found his buyer for all that gear. If she turned out to be another cheapskate like Wang Defa, then so be it. He wasn't losing out anyway with $1 million already in hand. A while later, Li Yi asked what exactly that prison gate fragment was and whether it was really that important, and Shangguji explained that with enough fragments, he could push his strength to S rank or even beyond. Li Yi lingered on the thought of reaching S rank. Meanwhile, Shangguji brooded, wondering if those bastards were still out there, now that prison gate fragments were surfacing again, deciding that he had to accelerate his recovery and recognizing that kid as the key. Someday, he knew he'd have to face things that went far beyond human understanding. He debated whether to warn the fool right now, but he dismissed the idea, deciding it was too soon and would only terrify him. Better to let him get stronger first. At the NG Corporation's E-Class Forbidden Zone, sealed after the mining accident, Li Yi mentioned that the guards consisted of 1 B rank and 3 C rank awakened, and he figured it was overkill to send that many high-level awakened to guard the place. He admitted that with his current strength, he still couldn't uncover the truth, and Shangguji pressed him on what could possibly be worth digging into when it was just an E-Class dimensional rift. Li Yi revealed that his parents were inside, and so was the truth about their deaths. He remembered when Kui Shihao tossed out 200,000 yuan, calling it compensation from NG Group, and told him to just take the money and sign the accidental death report. Kui Shihao challenged him, wondering if that amount wasn't enough. Li Yi snapped back that what he wanted was the truth. Kui Shihao repeated that he'd already explained there'd been an accident inside, and his parents, along with the other miners, had all died. But Li Yi rejected it outright. That was impossible because both his parents were C-rank awakened, and as he demanded to know how they could have had an accident, he insisted they must still be alive and pushed for them to let him in to search. The bodyguard warned him that anything could happen in a forbidden zone, and even C-rank awakened weren't invincible. But Li Yi countered that it was only an E-rank forbidden zone, meaning the monsters inside couldn't be above E rank, and when the bodyguard ordered him to behave, he declared that his parents could have escaped safely even if monsters attacked. The bodyguard accused him of just angling for more money. He accused Li Yi of begging for death. Suddenly, Ning Donghao, NG Group's chairman, and an A-rank awakened cut them off, telling them to stop. He reminded Kui Shihao that he'd told him to handle the bereaved families properly and challenged whether this was what he called proper. He advised Li Yi to take the money, saying 200,000 wasn't much, but it could help solve his immediate problems. But Li Yi fired back that he didn't want money, only the truth. Ning Donghao conceded, agreeing to investigate and promising him answers. Back then, Li Yi believed that with NG Group's boss making that promise, the truth about his parents' deaths would surface soon, but instead they smeared his parents as thieves and demanded millions in compensation from him. Shangguji remarked that no matter what race they were, without power, they would always get bullied. Rather than standing there doing nothing, Shangguji told him to collect more portal fragment pieces because once he had absolute power, uncovering those so-called truths would be effortless. Li Yi agreed inwardly and wondered if people would still refuse to invite him onto teams if his shadow energy could be detected, and he wasn't branded an E-rank minor. He considered the guy who kept claiming he wanted to take over his body while also helping him level up, wondering if he was actually good or bad, why he had shrunk when his powers weakened, and if he was truly insane, because that promise of making him S-rank might just be nonsense. Shangguji cut him off, saying that was enough, and that if he didn't have some talent, he wouldn't bother with him in the first place. Li Yi defended himself, pointing out that he hadn't said anything, and questioned why he was suddenly angry while privately thinking that Shangguji was losing it again, wondering if there was even a way to fix his mental state. Suddenly, a mission invitation popped up. Moments later, Li Yi arrived at the Chemical District's D-rank Forbidden Zone. When he reached the portal entrance, the officer demanded to know why he was late, and Li Yi apologized, explaining he lived far away, while thinking about how he had just come from another E-rank Forbidden Zone anyway. Uncle Hao recognized Li Yi, and Li Yi recognized him too, and as Uncle Hao remarked how long it had been since they last met, he asked if Li Yi was there for the mission as well. Uncle Hao noted how much Li Yi had grown, pointing out that it had already been 5 years since his parents' accident. Guda, a C-rank awakened mercenary, mocked that he thought they'd been waiting for someone important, only to find out it was just a dead miner, and the officer apologized, explaining that since the mission involved mining, they couldn't exactly ask other awakened to do manual labor. Guda urged them to quit wasting time and get on with the briefing, and the officer explained that the portal led to a D-rank Forbidden Zone, and their mission was to find ice crystal ore and mine 60 kilograms as samples. Li Yi silently noted that sending 4 C-rank awakened into a D-rank Forbidden Zone was total overkill. From the hostile energy rolling off those 4, he figured none of them had clean intentions, and he could sense that there was a C-rank awakened waiting inside the Forbidden Zone. Blood Leopard, the Black Panther gang's second-in-command, grinned and remarked that all his toys were already there. The hunting game was about to begin. Hao Wu nudged Li Yi, pressing if he really didn't need any protective gear. But Li Yi waved it off casually, claiming there was no need since he was already an awakened and could handle it. Gusan threw in a half-surprised remark about him being an awakened miner, calling it rare. But Guda barked back sharply, warning him to watch his mouth, because Li Yi was still the king of the trash heap. Hao Wu muttered that Li Yi shouldn't even bother engaging with them, and Li Yi replied with a calm shrug that he wasn't the reckless type anyway. His gaze swept the area, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that the plants there had been deliberately altered to make hiding easier. A faint, cold edge prickled at his senses, and he kept feeling a hidden killing intent circling nearby. He frowned slightly, wondering if he couldn't help this rising urge to strike first. If he sensed it, then that C-rank probably noticed too, and he kept wondering if that guy was just lurking in the shadows to observe or plotting something else entirely. Suddenly, Gusan barked that the trash needed to move faster and stop dragging their feet, and Hao Wu quickly promised that they would speed up right away. Li Yi found it perfect. This terrain was exactly what he needed to slip away, lose them, and quietly scope out what was happening. He told Hao Wu under his breath to hold tight. Gusan cursed behind them, snapping if that pathetic pace was really what a miner could manage. He ordered them to stop right there. But Guda scoffed and told him to ignore the 2 pieces of trash since they'd die without their help anyway. Meanwhile, Blood Leopard crouched unseen, his thoughts twisting around the fact that 3 of them had slipped into hiding. Did they sense the danger too? He decided it was better this way. If they were all as brainless as those 3, the game would have been boring. Gu-er turned to Guda, his voice low, admitting something about the mission felt wrong since stepping inside, like someone had been watching them the whole time. Guda dismissed him outright, telling him to quit being paranoid since it was just a D-rank mission, and demanded to know if 3 C-ranks couldn't handle it. Even so, Gusan muttered uneasily that something about this place was off. The cold, the creepiness, and maybe they should turn back. But Guda glared and demanded why he was suddenly joining in. The next second, both Guda and Gu-er stiffened, alarms firing in their bodies. Blood Leopard emerged from the shadows, his string snapping forward to snare Gusan from behind. He grinned darkly, announcing that the game had just begun, and mocked them for wanting to leave so soon. Guda shouted for him to release Gusan and state what he wanted, while Gusan cried out desperately for help, but Blood Leopard's voice stayed cold as he accused the three brothers of repeatedly provoking the Black Panther gang. He spat that there was nothing left to discuss. Guda and Gu'er froze in horror as Gusan's body was shredded apart before their eyes. Gu'er roared that he'd fight Blood Leopard, but Guda grabbed his arm, yelling for him not to go. Blood Leopard caught him in an instant anyway. His voice cut through the chaos, mocking if Gu'er really wanted to fight, then dismissed him as unworthy. Gu'er's eyes widened in shock as Blood Leopard's strings dug deeper into his flesh, locking him in agony. Guda's voice cracked, calling him a monster. Blood Leopard's grin sharpened as he whispered that prey full of fear always tasted the sweetest, while Guda choked out a plea for help. On the other side, Li Yi stopped and mentioned they should rest for a bit, which made Hao Wu glance at him and demand why he ditched those awakened. Li Yi calmly asked if Hao Wu had made enemies with anyone or any organization recently, and when Hao Wu protested that he was just a miner and had no way to make enemies, he pressed on, questioning why he'd asked something like that. Li Yi explained flatly that this mission was a death trap, and someone clearly wanted to bury all of them inside that forbidden zone. Hao Wu muttered nervously that he shouldn't scare him like that, but Li Yi shot back that he better spill if he knew anything. Before he could respond, Guda stormed up, raging that the little brat had spotted the danger earlier, but kept quiet, getting his brothers killed. Li Yi's voice turned sharp as he remarked that at least Guda wasn't entirely useless, since, before dying, he'd helped point out the mastermind. Guda snapped at him, demanding what the hell he was talking about. Li Yi's tone stayed steady as he clarified that he was saying Guda was about to die. Guda barked back, demanding when he'd done that. Blood Leopard's laughter slipped in, admitting he didn't expect a miner to be this interesting. Li Yi's expression hardened as he unleashed his ultimate shadow sense. Hao Wu instantly recognized Blood Leopard, and as he begged him to let them go, he frantically blurted out that they were just miners and had never held any grudge against him. Blood Leopard retorted with a cold edge, remarking that while they might not have any grudge, if it weren't for his slip of the tongue a few days ago, they wouldn't have known he was the one who got away. Hao Wu desperately declared that he would take that secret to his grave and swore he would never breathe a word of it to anyone. But Blood Leopard casually remarked that he had always lived by one unshakable truth. Li Yi sharply warned Hao Wu to be careful, and Blood Leopard snarled that dead men tell no tales. Li Yi spat back, calling him a bastard. He darted forward and threw himself in front of him without hesitation. Blood Leopard chuckled darkly, saying he hadn't expected a mere miner to have any tricks up his sleeve, and no wonder he could handle that Zhou Ting kid. But he sneered that Zhou Ting was the limit of what he could handle. He lunged with his claws, but Li Yi slipped past, and the ground behind him exploded into rubble. Blood Leopard warned that if Li Yi wanted to die first, he would gladly grant that wish, while Li Yi activated his shadow enhancement in defiance. He braced himself, raising his guard to block the incoming blows. But a grim thought struck him. What if even shadow enhancement wasn't enough to stop those attacks? Blood Leopard taunted him with a mocking edge, asking if he was still spacing out in the middle of the battle. The next strike smashed into him, and he was hurled through the air, slamming hard against a tree trunk. Hao Wu called out to him in alarm, but he barked at him to stay back while his mind raced, knowing close combat left him at a crushing disadvantage. So he had to rethink his entire approach. Blood Leopard snarled that worrying was pointless because both of them were going to die tonight anyway. Li Yi growled back that they would see who died first, and in response, he unleashed his ultimate shadow sense. He invoked his shadow form, Dagger with lethal precision. But Blood Leopard scoffed, asking if that pitiful move was all he had. Li Yi shot back that it obviously wasn't. Blood Leopard admitted he had plenty of tricks for a miner, but he mocked him anyway, saying it was unfortunate he was still just an E rank. Suddenly, Hazy burst from hiding, roaring that Blood Leopard should die. Blood Leopard smirked coldly, confessing he had expected Hazy to stay concealed and wait for the perfect moment to strike, but it was a shame his skill turned out to be his greatest weakness. Close combat, after all, was Blood Leopard's domain. Hazy's expression froze in shock. Blood Leopard's claws blurred again as he snarled that Hazy should die. Li Yi reeled, wondering if a C rank had really been taken out that easily. With a bitter edge, he muttered that the power gap was too wide, so he and Hao Wu needed to find some way out of this death trap. Blood Leopard mocked him, demanding if he actually thought he could escape and daring him to even try. Moments later, dark clouds slid across the sky, swallowing parts of the pale crescent moon. Li Yi turned to Hao Wu, insisting he let him tend to his wounds first, and when night fell, he'd find a chance to get him out. But Hao Wu shook his head, urging him to leave alone because, in his condition, he'd only drag him down. Li Yi pressed him, demanding what exactly he had done and why Blood Leopard wanted him dead so badly. Hao Wu admitted in a low, tense voice that it was because Blood Leopard believed he had uncovered the truth behind his parents' deaths. Li Yi snapped his gaze toward him, eyes burning with raw fury, shadow energy seeping out like a storm ready to erupt. Li Yi pressed Hao Wu if he knew anything and urged him to spit it out fast. Hao Wu admitted he hadn't been sure before, but since Blood Leopard came after him, that alone proved Kuishi Hao was dirty. Before the mining accident, Li Yi's father had warned him that he suspected Kuishi Hao was running dangerous experiments down there, but he never expected the disaster to hit just days later, dragging his parents into false accusations of theft. Li Yi pressed him on why he hadn't spoken up back then. Hao Wu confessed he failed them, but he was just a miner, and losing his job wasn't an option when he had a family depending on him. Li Yi snapped, asking if he had simply let his parents take the fall. Hao Wu admitted guilt gnawed at him too, otherwise he wouldn't have drowned himself in liquor invented to others, putting a death sentence on his own back. Suddenly, Blood Leopard slashed straight through the tree Hao Wu leaned against. Li Yi jolted in alarm. Hao Wu got tangled in Blood Leopard's strings. He choked out an apology. He muttered that Li Yi shouldn't hate him. Blood Leopard taunted, remarking he finally figured out why Li Yi looked familiar. He was the son of those two C ranks. He mocked that he'd send him down to reunite with his parents, but Li Yi fired back that he could only dream. The clash erupted. Li Yi flinched as the strings tore into his flesh. Blood Leopard sneered, asking how it felt and if it wasn't thrilling watching his own blood spray everywhere. Li Yi shot back that his blood spider silk wasn't untouchable. He unleashed Shadow Form, Giant Sword, knowing the instant Blood Leopard attacked was when his defense was weakest. He warned him to brace himself. Blood Leopard immediately leapt back, putting space between them. He scoffed that Li Yi was trading blow for blow, calling him one tough kid. Meanwhile, Li Yi cursed inwardly, wondering if he'd already hit his limit. Blood Leopard laughed, claiming it was just a bluff, and Li Yi only startled him for a second. Li Yi couldn't move even as Blood Leopard's strings coiled around him. Blood Leopard jeered that if Li Yi weren't stuck at E rank, this fight would be over already. He taunted him to come on and finish it. He mocked him, asking if he was still trying to kill him with that glare. He admitted that seeing ants like him with that unwilling defiance in their eyes excited him. To stoke that unwillingness even more, he promised a secret. Hao Wu only had half the story right. The parents didn't die in the mining accident. They died by his hand. Rage flooded Li Yi. Blood Leopard grinned wide, saying that was the look. And when he'd killed his mother, his father had worn the same expression. He described how the man could only watch helplessly as he hacked his wife to pieces. Li Yi roared his name, baffled as he realized the threads were burning away. He declared that Blood Leopard was a monster. His shadow energy surged wildly, carrying him down in perfect control. Power rippled off him like a storm breaking loose. He vowed he was going to kill him. Blood Leopard figured the brat could twist his hatred into raw fuel and burn it into his shadow energy. Meanwhile, the system pinged Li Yi, alerting him about a massive surge in shadow energy, triggering an automatic level recalibration. The recalibration finished at C rank, upgrading shadow enhancement from stage 1 to stage 2 and unlocking a brand new skill, Shadow Step. Blood Leopard couldn't believe his eyes and wondered how the kid's brutal wounds had healed so quickly, questioning if he had healing skills too, and he confirmed it bluntly, exactly like that. A prey thrashing wildly before dying. Nothing was more entertaining. But Li Yi challenged him, pressing if he really believed he was the prey here. He triggered his newly unlocked Shadow Step, declaring that inside the realm of shadows, the one hunted was him. Blood Leopard froze, baffled at how the brat had suddenly powered up so much, muttering that his speed had gotten frighteningly sharp, but he snapped that it still wasn't enough to kill him. Li Yi threw back that he should test it and unleashed his shadow form flying daggers. Blood Leopard scoffed that the flashy trick wouldn't work on him. Then Li Yi warped in an instant using Shadow Teleport Instant Flash, taunting if it felt real enough. He coolly pressed him about his next attack. Blood Leopard spat that it was pointless since those flimsy toy knives couldn't pierce his defense anyway. But then, shock rippled through him as Li Yi suddenly vanished. Li Yi's voice cut in, sharp and cold, asking who ever said he was aiming for the defense in the first place. He explained that Blood Leopard couldn't possibly juggle both offense and defense, not when his bloodline control lagged behind his reaction speed. That flaw was his fatal weakness. Li Yi blitzed him from every angle, blades cutting in at incredible speeds. Blood Leopard barked that it couldn't be happening. He roared, demanding how he could possibly lose to a mere minor. Li Yi told him to quit stalling and demanded to know what really went down during that mining accident years ago. Blood Leopard spat curses at him. Li Yi's blade flashed. Blood Leopard yelled about his mangled hand. His scream split the air. Li Yi warned him flatly that his patience had limits. Blood Leopard scoffed bitterly, questioning what difference it would even make, and finally spat out the truth. It was all Kui Shihao's doing. He revealed that Kui's father had uncovered his experiments, and to cover everything up, Kui ordered them to slaughter Li Yi's parents and staged the whole thing as a mining accident. Li Yi's fury burned hot against Kui Shihao's name. Blood Leopard sneered, daring him if he'd back down now that he knew Ung Corporation was behind it. He goaded him to let him go while he still could, but Li Yi swore that every single one of them who killed his parents would pay, and not a single one would escape. Moments later, rain came pounding down from the sky. Li Yi headed straight for Ung Group headquarters. He stalked Kui Shihao from the shadows. Shang Ji warned him firmly that even though he had climbed to C rank, he shouldn't throw his life away so recklessly. He should have sensed by now that an A rank awakened was nearby. Li Yi replied that he knew. The founder of Ung Group, Ning Donghao, an A rank awakened, sat inside that car. He reassured him that he wasn't reckless enough to strike Kui Shihao there. Besides, Blood Leopard's words weren't gospel, and he needed to dig deeper to find out if Kui Shihao acted alone or if the higher-ups were pulling strings behind the scenes. If Ning Donghao was involved, his A-rank status wouldn't save him. Blood debt demanded blood. Li Yi wondered why Kui Shihao came sneaking into the Black Panther gang's warehouse in the dead of night, suspicion stirring with every step. The gang leader warned sharply that they needed to be careful, because those crates were all loaded with experimental materials, unstable and dangerous. Kui Shihao pressed him, demanding to know if the old miner Hao Wu was dead. The gang leader muttered that Blood Leopard's whereabouts were unknown, and the portal fragment he used to infiltrate had vanished. So there was no way to confirm Hao Wu's fate. Kui Shihao snapped, demanding what the hell had happened, and whether Blood Leopard wasn't supposed to be a C rank. But the gang leader admitted he must have underestimated his opponents because 4 C rank awakened were lying dead. Kui Shihao ordered them to haul that equipment inside right away before something disastrous happened, since they were at a critical stage in the experiments and couldn't afford a single mistake. The gang leader asked if the money was ready, but Kui Shihao dismissed his concern and told him not to worry about that. Li Yi realized then with certainty that it really was Kui Shihao. Suddenly, the gang leader's gaze snapped in his direction, sensing movement in the shadows. He barked out, demanding who was there. Kui Shihao frowned, asking what was wrong, while the gang leader hesitated, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. Though he could swear he'd felt a killing intent a moment earlier. Li Yi clenched his jaw, knowing that had been too close, and cursed under his breath that his C-rank abilities still weren't enough. The next day, he headed straight to the Qin Group, Qin Shaoshang's industry on Dragon Gate 3rd Street. Shang Guji spotted him and remarked bluntly if he shouldn't be out looking for missions instead of wandering in there. Li Yi replied casually that, of course, he was there to hunt for the 3rd fragment, and also to check the value of his weapon. Out of nowhere, the receptionist stepped up and politely asked how she could assist him that day. He told her he was looking for Qin Xian, and she asked pointedly if he had an appointment. Suddenly, Su Qing's cold voice cut through, mocking him for daring to show his filthy miner face there and addressing their young mistress so casually. She added with a sneer that Qin Teng should look at how that beggar was polluting their air, and Qin Teng turned to a nearby guard, demanding why he hadn't thrown him out yet. The guard stiffened and agreed instantly. Li Yi asked evenly if this was really how Dragon Gate 3rd Street treated their guests. Su Qing scoffed at the word guest and spat that he wasn't even fit to be their dog, while Qin Teng laughed and declared he wouldn't let him lick his boots. Li Yi wondered bitterly if all Qin family members were this arrogant and figured there was no longer any point in bothering with Qin Xian. He declared that since that was the case, he would be taking his leave. But Qinteng blocked him and mocked if he thought he could just walk away, snarling that there wasn't a chance. He barked an order to cripple him. Li Yi blurred into motion, using his shadow step to dismantle the guards with ruthless precision before seizing Qinteng by the throat. Su Qing screamed that he should release him immediately, warning that the Qin family wouldn't spare him if he didn't. Li Yi clicked his tongue, muttering how annoying this was, and stated coldly that he'd spare Qinteng today only for Qin Xiyin's sake. Qinteng cursed him furiously, demanding who he thought he was and vowing to kill him on the spot. Li Yi turned his head slightly, a glint of shadow energy flashing in his eyes. Across from him, Qinteng's own gaze burned with energy just as fiercely. Suddenly, Qin Xiyin's bodyguard stepped in sharply, declaring that was enough. She berated Qinteng outright for daring to cause trouble inside the Qin group. Qinteng loudly claimed that Li Yi was dead meat for daring to stir up trouble at Qin Corporation, insisting that his sister would never let him walk away unscathed. Qin Xian retorted that they should just throw him out, but Qinteng scoffed, snapping that she was being way too soft and that breaking his arms and legs would be more fitting. He didn't expect it at all when the bodyguard suddenly grabbed him by the collar. He blurted out a demand to Qin Xian, pressing what she thought she was doing, and reminded her pointedly that he was her cousin. Su Qing immediately cut in, stressing that the poor miner had addressed Qin Xian by her name directly, and Qinteng was simply defending her honor. But Qin Xian shot back that Li Yi was her friend, challenging if it was wrong for him to call her name so openly. She declared that all those arrogant security guards and that clerk should be fired on the spot and banned from ever being hired again, earning immediate agreement from the others. Su Qing quickly jumped in, flaunting her status as young Master Qin's girlfriend, pleading for Qin Xian to think about his feelings and even begged Li Yi to speak up for her since she had given him everything. Qin Xian turned on her, coldly asking if Li Yi was supposed to be the so-called young Master Qin, then mocked that he was more like Qin the Beast, warning that if he dared to use the Qin family name to fool people again, she would never forgive him, forcing him to nod stiffly. She turned to Li Yi next, admitting that she hadn't expected him to show up, and inviting him inside without hesitation. She offered an apology, explaining that a junior from a side branch had embarrassed her in front of him. But Li Yi brushed it off casually, remarking that every family had its share of problematic relatives. She nodded and was about to continue when her assistant approached, mentioning that Qin Shaoshang wanted to see her. She apologized again and requested Li Yi to wait a moment, promising to return soon, and he reassured her with an easy response, telling her to take her time. Curious, she asked her assistant if it was something urgent, but the assistant admitted that Qin Shaoshang hadn't said a word and only asked for her presence. Then, out of nowhere, the blinds in the office started sliding shut. In the next instant, they slammed completely to the floor. Qin Shaoshang strode inside and locked his attention on Li Yi. As he pressed him, demanding to know exactly who he was, Li Yi silently triggered his ultimate shadow sense to analyze him. He quickly judged that Qin Shaoshang was an A rank with dual skills. Li Yi tried to diffuse the tension, suggesting maybe there was a misunderstanding, claiming he was just a miner, while inwardly gritting his teeth at the disgusting mental attack and thinking how useless his shadow enhancement was here. Qin Shaoshang mused coldly that the intimidating gaze should have triggered fear by now, then questioned if Li Yi was really a miner. He declared that he doubted it was that simple. Without warning, he launched a fierce lightning strike at Li Yi. Li Yi held his ground, and Qin Shaoshang looked faintly amused. He remarked that anyone who could withstand his attack had to be at least B rank, then sneered, asking if Li Yi still intended to pretend he was just a miner. He demanded that Li Yi speak up, grilling him about his purpose for using a fake identity to get close to Qin Xian, and warned that if he didn't confess honestly, he'd have no one to blame for what followed. Suddenly, Qin Xian stormed in, snapping at him and accusing him of deliberately sending her away just to interrogate her friend, questioning if he had nothing better to do. Qin Shaoshang threw up his hands, urging her to calm down since they were still in the office, telling her to save face for her old man, but she shot back coldly, asking if he even deserved face after acting like this, and ordered him to leave and stop harassing her friend. Li Yi's mind raced as he realized this had to be Qin Shaoshang, Dragon Gate's leader. Qin Xian immediately turned back to him, apologizing again and explaining that her father always suspected ulterior motives from anyone near her. Li Yi waved it off lightly, saying he understood, and knew her father only worried she'd get tricked by scumbags. She eyed him thoughtfully, noting that he seemed to know her father well, and he quipped that it was hard not to know him, Meanwhile, Qin Shaoshang muttered aloud, questioning whether this kid could actually have feelings for his daughter, vowing that his precious girl couldn't be taken away so easily. He grumbled that even though Li Yi wasn't a blonde punk yet, nobody could predict if he'd dye his hair later. And he declared fiercely that the little princess he had raised for 16 years couldn't be hurt at all. So, if needed, he'd do this and then that. Li Yi silently observed that he was blurting out his inner thoughts. Qin Xian finally turned to her father and bluntly told him to get lost. A short while later, she explained to Li Yi that the card contained a 5 million yuan deposit, because the massive sword from before was made of special materials, and the client wanted it appraised before naming a price. Li Yi accepted it without issue, but mentioned that he was actually here for something else too. He asked if she knew where he might find that kind of thing. She explained that unknown fragments from other dimensions used to be common, but recently someone had been buying them in bulk, making them scarce in the market. She suggested he try Dragon Gate's auction house, since they occasionally turned up there, earning his thanks. Nearby, Shang Gujai mulled over the situation, suspecting that someone was actively collecting the fragments and wondering if it tied back to those people. The bodyguard explained that Li Yi was only 20 years old and had been ordinary until recently being classified as an E-rank awakened, but since no detectable energy existed in his body, he remained just a minor. Qin Shaoshang pressed if he jumped from E-rank to C-rank within mere days, or if that kid had been hiding his strength all along. Suddenly, he turned to Old Huo, questioning why he had called him that day, and Old Huo chuckled, calling him an old fox before asking if he managed to get more of those great swords his daughter had brought last time. Qin Shaoshang admitted he wasn't sure, and pushed for the reason, and Old Huo urged him to find out immediately, saying they'd take every single one available. Qin Shaoshang remarked on how unusually eager he sounded, and probed if the sword had special properties. Old Huo refused to share details, stating only that its material could significantly boost the entire military strength. Qin Shaoshang concluded that Li Yi had a mysterious background, since he could casually produce extraordinary weapons, making him truly unfathomable. Meanwhile, at the auction, Li Yi scanned the place, thinking there were plenty of items and hoping he might actually find fragments there. Suddenly, Su Qing swore to Zhou Ting that nothing ever happened between her and Qin Teng, explaining that Qin Teng harassed her and she even quit her job at Qin Corp to avoid him, and Zhou Ting dismissed it, declaring that if she quit, then from now on, he'd take care of her. She softly remarked on how good he was to her, while secretly wondering if Blood Leopard hadn't dealt with the miner yet. He then demanded to know how a miner even managed to sneak inside. Li Yi casually mentioned that it seemed his memory wasn't great. He taunted him, asking if he had already forgotten the sting of getting slapped just a few days ago. Zhou Ting warned him not to come any closer. Suddenly, Black Leopard stepped in, accusing Zhou Ting of embarrassing their Black Panther gang. He declared that humiliating his subordinate meant humiliating the entire gang, and ordered Li Yi to kneel and apologize immediately. The floor beneath Li Yi's feet cracked, but he scoffed, asking if he should kneel, then snapped that Black Leopard should keep dreaming. Black Leopard admitted he hadn't expected him to have such a backbone, while Zhou Ting sneered that the worthless miner should know his place and avoid provoking Black Leopard. Suddenly, Qin Xian addressed Black Leopard, saying he was welcome at Dragon Gate as a customer, but if he wanted trouble, they'd gladly accommodate him. Black Leopard smirked, agreeing to let it go that day, and suggested they head to the auction house. Qin Xian checked if Li Yi was okay, and he reassured her that he was fine. Meanwhile, Black Leopard turned to Zhou Ting, demanding to know the kid's background and how they ended up in conflict with him. And Zhou Ting explained that Li Yi stole the sword meant for him, and even threatened to destroy their gang. Black Leopard pressed if he was certain, and as Zhou Ting affirmed, Su Qing backed him up, insisting she could testify too. Suddenly, Kui Shihao noticed his expression and asked what was wrong. Black Leopard revealed that Li Yi had been one of Blood Leopard's hunting targets last time, and was somehow still alive. He wondered if Blood Leopard could have been killed by him, but Zhou Ting dismissed the idea, scoffing that Li Yi was just an E-rank waste who couldn't possibly match their vice leader. On the other hand, Li Yi's anger surged the moment he spotted Kui Shihao. Kui Shihao also recognized him instantly. He narrowed his eyes, questioning internally if this was the same spineless weakling from before. He then wondered how on earth he ended up connected to Qin Xian. Li Yi pressed Qin Xian about why she showed up, and she explained with a quick shrug that her father suddenly declared he wanted to see him. He narrowed his eyes and pushed if the man wouldn't try to pick a fight again, and she waved it off, assuring him he shouldn't worry because he wouldn't dare make a move while she was around. Out of nowhere, Kui Shihao chimed in, remarking with fake warmth that he didn't expect to run into his nephew there. But Li Yi snapped back, tossing out that he was just some insignificant guy forced into mine work to pay off debts, then jabbed with a cold edge, questioning how he'd dare rub shoulders with a high-ranking NG executive like him. Kui Shihao responded smoothly, claiming the handling of his parents' matter came straight from the higher-ups and that he wanted to help. But his influence had been too small to change anything. Li Yi scoffed under his breath, saying he was really trying to scrub his hands clean, but deep down they both knew perfectly well what really went down. Then, casually, he relayed Hao Wu's message, that paper can't hide fire forever, and karma hunts down those who walk the path of evil. Black Leopard growled that the brat needed a hard lesson, but Kui Shihao waved him off, pointing out that they were standing in Qin Shaoshang's territory, so they couldn't make a move just yet. Still, since that kid knew too much, Kui Shihao ordered him to send someone to erase the problem quietly, and Black Leopard agreed, promising to arrange it without delay. Meanwhile, Qin Xian approached her father, addressing him directly and announcing she'd brought Li Yi, while the host's booming voice addressed the crowd of ladies and gentlemen, officially kicking off the night's auction. Qin Xian leaned closer to Li Yi, whispering that since the auction was starting, he should talk with her father first and she'd let him know if his item came up, to which he murmured thanks. He turned politely toward Qin Shaoshang, asking why he wanted to see him, and Qin Shaoshang cut straight to the point. He questioned whether Li Yi still had any of those weapons he'd asked Qin Xian to sell last time, and Li Yi immediately caught on that he came specifically for them. It seemed he really wanted weapons from the Qingtian clan. Still, Li Yi planned to hold some back. Dumping too many at once wasn't safe and would drag down their value. So he smoothly explained that he'd only stumbled across them by chance and had just 2 left. Qin Shaoshang said that counting the previous one, he'd pay him 40 million more, bringing the total to 45 million, and asked for his thoughts on that offer. Li Yi admitted 15 million per weapon was decent, but reminded him those were life-saving tools for people like them, and Qin Shaoshang countered by asking what number he had in mind. Li Yi leaned back slightly and shot back 25 million per weapon. Qin Shaoshang blinked in surprise. He muttered that the guy had some nerve, just as Qin Xian suddenly called Li Yi's attention and announced that the item he wanted had appeared. She shifted toward Qin Shaoshang, and he instantly agreed, saying fine. He'd transfer the remaining 70 million to him right away. Qin Xian pointed out that it should be the item Li Yi wanted, while Qin Shaoshang cursed him silently behind his composed expression. The host's voice rang out, declaring that Bidder 14 offered 6.5 million, while Bidder 17 raised it to 10 million. Then Bidder 6 jumped in with 15 million. Li Yi realized with a spark of excitement that they really had fragments on display, and with over 70 million on hand, he should be able to secure them. He confidently bid 30 million, figuring it would scare off the competition, though the sheer amount twisted painfully in his chest. The host announced Bidder 9's 30 million bid, and asked if anyone dared to go higher, just as Black Leopard recognized him, and muttered why he'd even bid on that. The host repeated 30 million once, 30 million twice. Then Kui Shihao slammed down a bid of 50 million, coldly provoking him to see how deep his pockets ran. The host confirmed Bidder 2's 50 million offer, and Li Yi immediately countered with 60 million. Qin Shaoshang warned him the item wasn't worth that price, and suggested he quit now and avoid burning the cash he just secured. And Qin Xian backed him up, explaining that Kui Shihao was clearly inflating the price on purpose since those rarely ever went over 10 million. But Li Yi wasn't about to back down. If Kui Shihao wanted it, he'd make him bleed for it. A sharp edge flashed in his thoughts as he wondered whose financial power ran deeper. Was it Qin Corporation or NG Group? Qin Shaoshang declared that of course it was his Qin Corporation, but he pressed Li Yi on why he should even bother helping him, while the host announced that Bidder 2 had offered 70 million. Li Yi replied that it was because he had that covered. Qin Shaoshang stated that he would take those 2 at the previous price, but he warned that little cash wouldn't be enough to compete with the others, while Li Yi assured him not to worry, claiming that if he dared to speak, he could certainly deliver the matching quantity. Qin Shaoshang wondered aloud if the kid actually had quite a few more, while the host called out 70 million once. Suddenly, Qin Xian questioned if he was fussing over such a small amount, and declared that if Li Yi couldn't cover it, she would repay him, and he agreed. The host announced 70 million twice. Qin Xian urged Li Yi to hurry before the bad guy snatched it away, and he marveled inwardly at how the world of the rich worked, where even 100 million felt like pocket change to them. He then raised the bid to 100 million, and the host confirmed that bidder 9 offered 100 million. Kui Shihao figured the fragment was critical for the corporation's confidential projects and decided he had to secure it, so he threw in a bid of 200 million. The price climbed to 500 million, prompting one attendee to question if those two were insane for battling over that fragment, another to wonder if the fragment truly held that much value, and yet another to dismiss it as just two wealthy guys clashing, with the fragment's worth being irrelevant. Black Leopard claimed the kid was provoking them on purpose, but Kui Shihao scoffed that he wasn't worth that effort. He then pushed the bid to 1 billion. The host announced bidder 2's 1 billion offer. Qin Xian muttered that the bad guy was baiting them, and Li Yi considered that knowing Kui Shihao's personality, there was no way he would lose that kind of money on impulse. Qin Shaoshang warned Li Yi to think carefully since the bid had already reached 1 billion, questioning if he could actually produce that many weapons. Qin Xian reminded him that she had already promised to cover whatever came up short, asked him to stop killing the mood, and urged Li Yi to bid quickly and not let the bad guy succeed. Li Yi confidently offered 2 billion, and as the host confirmed bidder 9's 2 billion bid, he called out for any higher offers. Kui Shihao boiled with rage. Li Yi just flashed him a smug smile. The host declared 2 billion once, 2 billion twice, and Black Leopard wondered aloud where the kid had gotten that much money. Kui Shihao snarled that it came from Qin Shaoshang, pointing out where else the kid would get 2 billion. The host called 2 billion for the third time and congratulated bidder 9 on winning the unknown fragment. Qin Xian exclaimed that it was perfect, while Li Yi asked if she really needed to get that excited. She admitted that she just loved watching bad guys get smacked in the face. Qin Shaoshang remarked that bidding was fun, but 2 billion was massive. Even deducting the previous amount, he still needed to deliver over 70 weapons and questioned if Li Yi could actually supply that many. Li Yi replied that rare things carried value and explained that with so many items, the price couldn't be measured like before. He snapped his fingers. He revealed that there were over 100 pieces there and asked if he was right that it should be enough to cover the 2 billion cost. Qin Shaoshang commended him for being straightforward and considered the kid someone with solid character and strength, making him a potential recruit. Qin Xian then called out for Li Yi's attention. She told him that next time he had something interesting going on, he'd better remember to invite her, while Qin Shaoshang privately decided it was safer if he didn't, because the kid might end up stealing his precious daughter instead. He instructed Qin Xian to come home with him and told Li Yi to go ahead and collect his winning item, and Li Yi thanked him. Qin Shaoshang then offered parting advice, explaining that while he had his own methods, the Ung group was equally formidable and not something one person could shake. Sometimes, he said, it was necessary to form alliances with partners who shared the same goals, and if Li Yi was interested, he could reach out. Meanwhile, Black Leopard acknowledged Kui Shihao's instructions, saying he understood. Qin Shaoshang and his daughter left, and Li Yi was the one heading to collect the fragment. Kui Shihao ordered that they wait until the kid left Dragon Gate 3rd Street's territory before making any move and warned them not to mess it up. Black Leopard assured him not to worry, revealing that he had Zhou Ting bringing 3 skilled C-rank fighters, so nothing would go wrong. Li Yi noted that it looked like Qin Shaoshang had dug up a lot of info on him, since that last line was obviously meant to butter him up. If he is not going to be restrained by him, then allying for more support wouldn't be bad. But Shang Guji pointed out that he was only an A rank, and as long as he has enough fragments, he guarantees he will easily become S rank. He then demanded to know what that look meant and whether he doubted him, and Li Yi insisted that he believed him, while pushing that wasn't exactly why he was scouting for a place to start the trial. But in his head, he doubted him, mulling over whether he treated S rank like common cabbage, counting only 9 S ranks worldwide, yet hearing it called easy to reach, something best left unsaid so as not to poke the bear. He was then surprised to see a fire up ahead. He wondered if it was his rented apartment. The people around shouted that they should run, while one demanded where his wife was and another bawled for their mom and dad. Suddenly, Li Yi's phone rang. Qin Xian called him and relayed fresh intel that the Black Panther was coming for him, and he muttered that he figured they had already made their move. She urged him to hide first and promised to bring people over, but he brushed it off, telling her not to worry because he could handle it. Zhou Ting crowed that he had finally arrived and that the man should kneel and beg, maybe earning mercy to spare his dog life. Li Yi scoffed that Black Panther really underestimated him and wondered whether they were sending only a few to die. Zhou Ting declared that the other was the one destined to die, and challenged how an E rank like him could face 3 solid C ranks. Li Yi then demanded to know why he assumed Blood Panther could not kill him. One of the men remarked on his confidence and wondered whether he hid real strength, but Zhou Ting warned they should not be fooled because he was just a minor. He has no combat ability at all. One of the men lunged at Li Yi from behind. Just as he swung his blade, Li Yi vanished, leaving the attacker stunned as his blade thudded into the ground. Li Yi allowed that the man was right to call him just a minor. One of the men demanded how that could be and when he had gotten there. Zhou Ting ordered the 2 men to go and attack together. Li Yi shot back that he was at least part of the underworld and questioned how he could fear a mere minor like him. He taunted him about whether he liked playing with fire. Zhou Ting barked that he should let him go. Li Yi warned he would let him play enough, and Zhou Ting snapped that Kuishihao and Black Leopard would not let him off. He screamed in pain as the fire they had raised licked at him. Li Yi assured he would send them down to join him soon, just as Qin Xian called out to him. She checked whether he was okay, and he shrugged that he was fine. They were just a few small fry. She probed what he planned next, and he declared that since they had moved first, he would of course counterattack. She promised she would help then. He pressed why she wanted to help, and she answered that she had long been sick of the Black Panther gang, and that they had even dared to lay hands on her friend. He is one of the few friends she has. He agreed, all right. Then they should start by taking down the Black Panther gang. Qin Xian remarked that before Li Yi found a new place, he might as well crash there for now since no one usually stayed around anyway, so she told him to just pick a room. He replied that he'd take that one, but she countered that the room was off limits. That room wasn't acceptable. He complained that it was too girly, but it honestly fit her, and she commented that she figured he'd think it childish for the Qin group's heir to like such things. He countered that it was perfectly normal for girls to like that stuff. He teased that she was way cuter than when she acted all cold outside, and she realized that no one had ever used that word on her before. Then, her stomach growled out of nowhere. He tried hard to smother a chuckle, and when she pressed if he was laughing, she grumbled that he wouldn't even be starving right now if she hadn't been so worried about his safety. He casually conjured food out of thin air. He mentioned that she should just deal with that since it was only his emergency stash. She pressed him on where he pulled that from, and noted she'd already been wondering where he got that weapon during the auction. He bragged that he knew a few magic tricks, and she jumped in saying he ought to teach her. Then, he suddenly spotted Qin Shaoshang. He quickly urged Qin Xian to head home first, and she demanded to know why. Meanwhile, Qin Shaoshang muttered what kind of love potion that brat had fed his precious daughter, pointing out that she'd already brought him there when they just met, and it was a place she normally wouldn't even let him near, and she hadn't chatted that cheerfully with him in forever. A guy and girl alone at night? Definitely not right, so the brat better keep his distance or he'd end up in trouble. And Li Yi muttered that if Qin Xian didn't head back soon, her dad might just eat him alive. She was so furious that she called her father by his own name. Moments later, Li Yi remarked that the apartment sat in Longman 3rd Street's territory, so no one would dare bother them. He remembered snagging a fragment each from the Lava Minotaur, the Blood Panther, and the auction house, and declared that it was time to start. He had always been curious what connection those fragments had to the rifts that appeared out of nowhere. Shangguji explained that technically, the 3 fragments before him were just tiny pieces of the gate to the otherworld prison, and every rift in his world tied back to shards of that gate. He told him to step inside, and Li Yi pressed him to explain what another dimension actually was, since he seemed to know so much. He asked why it held so many strange beings, insectoids, and beast folk. Shangguji explained that they were all prisoners, and that what they called another dimension or other world was in fact a massive dimensional prison. Li Yi dug deeper about the prison and the inmates. Shangguji replied that if he wanted more answers, he should finish all the trials inside, and the truth would come to him naturally. And Li Yi pressed what that meant. Shangguji stated that it was the Sky Tower, his proudest invention and his testing ground. Li Yi wondered about its bizarre style and figured it made sense since the guy looked just as weird. He questioned what was up with those huge pipes. Maybe reinforcement so the tower didn't collapse. And when he noticed the material matched those weapons, he wondered if Qin Shaoshang would snatch it and figured it would fetch a good price. Shangguji restrained himself, reminding that his soul belonged to him, and if he lost his temper, it would scatter and no one would care. Li Yi then demanded to know what the trial involved, and Shangguji explained that the Sky Tower had 6 levels, and with his current strength, clearing the first floor's Shadow Wyvern would already be impressive. Li Yi asked about the Shadow Wyvern and if that was really what he meant. He questioned why it didn't feel intimidating. It had a stubby tail, its limbs looked tiny, its eyes were sharp but not menacing. Li Yi doubted it was the Shadow Wyvern and quipped that it looked more like a gecko. He wondered if fighting it would even count as fair, and Shangguji remarked that he should laugh while he still could, because that laugh wouldn't last long. Li Yi then invited the little cutie to come over. He suddenly froze when its energy flared out. Its eyes turned feral, and a dark aura seeped around it. He was shoved back as it expanded into a full-blown wyvern. He barely caught his footing, staring up at the towering beast. The C-rank Shadow Wyvern unleashed its shadow enhancement, and its size, speed, and strength shot up by a wild 600%. Li Yi raised an eyebrow at that 600% boost, grumbling that it was triple his own shadow enhancement, then teased if he was using some knockoff version, and Shangguji coolly remarked that his physique couldn't compete with his pets. Li Yi pressed if he was serious about being weaker than that thing. He sprang into the air just in time to dodge the wyvern's brutal strike. He then jabbed at Shangguji, asking if he didn't get that being bigger only made it easier to have blind spots. He whipped his daggers from behind the wyvern with a sharp throw, but they just clanged uselessly against its scales without leaving a mark. He blinked, stunned. He demanded how that shadow enhancement was so absurdly defensive, and when Shangguji taunted him about still holding back, he snapped that he was basically tickling it at this rate. Li Yi then activated his own shadow enhancement. Shangguji coolly pointed out that if he couldn't tame it, he'd never clear the first trial. Li Yi slashed in a storm of cuts, striking from every side of the wyvern. He barked out if it was still completely fine after all that. Shangguji figured his shadow enhancement and shadow step were already refined enough, so it was time to crank the challenge higher. He then sent a telepathic nudge to the wyvern, wondering if it was feeling hungry too. He casually mentioned that the thing was edible. The wyvern instantly lunged, jaws wide, trying to swallow Li Yi whole. Li Yi dashed aside in a blur. The wyvern's tongue flicked as drool dripped while he locked eyes on him. Li Yi threw a sharp comment about whether that pet had even gotten vaccinated and why it looked like a nightmare. And Shangguji explained that he had drained its energy, so it probably saw him as a tasty refill now. Li Yi grumbled that it wasn't fair since they were in a proper fight, questioning when biting became part of the rules. He muttered that since it was hungry, it might as well go for this instead. It should witness his ultimate move. The wyvern froze when a piece of fried chicken zipped past its snout. It snatched it up immediately. Li Yi nodded smugly, saying it was right to grab it because that stuff was amazing. He then triggered his skill and locked the wyvern in place. He announced the win as the system chimed that Shadow Wyvern taming was confirmed, granting him access to the first floor. Shangguji commented that it was quite the glutton, while the system further announced that prison gate binding and activation permissions had been acquired. Li Yi blinked and questioned the whole binding and activation permissions part, asking what they were even for. Shangguji clarified that each fragment turned into a portal to the prison once fed enough energy. Li Yi pushed if that meant he could open portals whenever he wanted once he bound those dimensional fragments, and Shangguji affirmed it. Li Yi marveled that such a powerful feature came just from the first floor and guessed that the rewards from the next 5 would be off the charts. Shangguji quietly wondered if he was getting cocky after cheesing through the first floor and mused that they'd see how he handled the second. He told him to go ahead and try since the guards were merely the tower's attendants anyway, but Li Yi suspected he was plotting something, probably more shape-shifting beasts. He muttered that if the first floor's pet was already C-rank, the second floor was bound to be nasty. Shangguji told him that if he didn't trust him, he should go see for himself before judging. It wasn't like there was any real danger after all. Li Yi shrugged that it was fine then. He tensed the moment he spotted what was inside. A C-rank Thunder King Serpent, a C-rank Water Arrow Turtle, and a C-rank Lava Minotaur were staring back. Li Yi turned to Shangguji with a dry tone, asking if he'd seriously call those servants. The serpent lunged at Li Yi, and the other mutants attacked as well. He quickly moved away to dodge its attack. He glanced behind him. He suspected the entrance had also been sealed. The serpent ordered that they kill the intruders. Li Yi activated his skill, Shadow Step, to slip past its strike again. He then employed Shadow Enhancement to sidestep the other mutants. He sprinted toward the door, He managed to get out and angle himself to face the door. He yanked the door to pull it closed. He shut them with a loud bang. He accused Shang Guji of doing it on purpose and tricking him, claiming they were all servants inside. Shang Guji insisted he didn't lie. They really are servants. It was just that his ability is weak. Li Yi inquired what a lava minotaur could do, and the reply was heating. Li Yi inquired about the thunder serpent, and the reply was that it provides electricity. Li Yi inquired about the Blastoise, and the reply was that it mops the floor. Li Yi inquired about those mutants, and the reply was they do odd jobs like carrying stuff. Li Yi went speechless. Suddenly, the system flashed an alert that it detected a Class A creature approaching. He wondered why Qin Shaoshang and Qin Xian were coming at that time. A few moments later, Qin Shaoshang reported he heard from Qin Xian that she wanted to deal with the Black Panther gang. Li Yi agreed that it made sense, since Black Panther had already started targeting him, and rather than wait to be forced to defend, he preferred to take the initiative. Qin Shaoshang explained that the Black Panther gang has repeatedly provoked his longmen 3rd Street, yet he hasn't acted. And when prompted why, Li Yi suggested it was because he feared breaking the balance. Qin Shaoshang confirmed that was correct, explaining the 3 major powers of Haicheng keep each other in check. Wu Tianshu, as the city lord, controls Haicheng's politics, while Ning Dongwu's NG group controls the economy, and he wields power in politics and economy, second only to them. So even though he despises the Black Panther gang's bullying and extortion over the years, as long as they don't go too far, he cannot act. Because if he takes action against the Black Panther gang, one possibility is forcing Ning Dongwu and Wu Tianshu into an alliance. And another possibility is that he and Ning Dongwu both suffer losses, and Wu Tianshu seizes the chance to fully control Haicheng. Li Yi then pressed whether he meant that he didn't want the Qin family dragged in. Qin Shaoshang chuckled. He clarified no, he wanted him and Qin Xian to form a new force to deal with the Black Panther gang. And Li Yi probed whether he intended to wage a proxy war. Qin Shaoshang proposed that he was smart and he would provide money and people while he and Qin Xian executed. And that way the other 2 families wouldn't dare act rashly. And even if they failed, he could still mediate and protect them. Li Yi remarked that in just one night, he had planned that far, which was truly impressive. Qin Shaoshang confessed that if it weren't for his daughter insisting on fighting the Black Panther gang with him, he wouldn't care. And he grumbled about what sort of spell she had cast on her, admitting he was pouring money and effort into her. So if his daughter ran off with him too, it would be a huge loss. Maybe he should send her away, tie the brat up, and throw him far off. Li Yi hoped he could stop making his inner thoughts so obvious. Qin Xian urged Qin Shaoshang to get out of there. She then inquired of Li Yi what he planned to do next. He declared he would take missions. He would accept every mission for all the open dimensional entrances, and he would run through every dimensional entrance in Haicheng. She agreed. All right, she would arrange it. He then reckoned that once he had bound those fragments, it would be the Black Panther gang's darkest moment. Qin Xian declared that those were all carefully chosen by her, and from that point onward, the Shadow Gang would be at Li Yi's command. The Shadow Gang greeted her as their young miss, while they greeted him as their leader. She noted that since he took so long to decide on a name, she named it based on his skill. And when she pressed him about what was wrong and whether he disliked it, he shrugged it off as fine. He then activated his skill to inspect the men. He judged that all of them were C rank, which he considered a considerable force anywhere. He then inquired why all those people were wearing masks, and she explained it was to avoid exposing their identities and being threatened. She teased him about whether he didn't think it looked cool, and he shot back that maybe the artist was simply too lazy to draw so many faces. She queried what they should do next, and he replied that, of course, they steal jobs. He planned to snatch all of Black Panther Gang's commission jobs, and when she pointed out it was a ton of work, she wondered if they could handle it. He told her not to worry because they would only take the valuable ones, and he had other plans for the rest. A few moments later, Black Panther raged that his assistant was useless trash and demanded how he could let that newly risen Shadow Gang steal all the jobs. He scolded the assistant about whether he really needed to be taught how to deal with that, urging they send people to handle it if they were causing trouble. But the assistant admitted they could not. Black Panther grabbed him by the collar. He demanded what he meant, and the assistant reported that for every commission, no matter what it was, they sent out 5 or 6 C-rank evolvers. They didn't have enough C ranks, and Black Panther cursed inwardly as he wondered where that gang had even come from. He then ordered that they should spend the money to buy expedition slots and send people inside to find their targets. But the assistant revealed that the recent expedition slots had already been bought out by some unknown people. Black Panther snarled that he did not care if he stole them, robbed them, or paid a high price. He insisted the assistant get people inside because if they missed those few days of profit, he would hold him personally responsible. And the assistant gulped agreement. On the other hand, Chin Si-in was in her apartment when she received a call. She answered briefly, that fine, she understood. The Black Panther gang had bought their expedition slots at a high price, and she queried Li Yi about how he was so sure they would pay. He explained it was because they would not give up the most profitable chance of the quarter, and she admitted she did not understand. He clarified that it involved some unspoken rules of the mines. The supervisors and foremen of big and small mines, he outlined, stash away high-quality ore and rare items to sneak them out during end-of-quarter equipment inspections and sell. In the past, the Black Panther gang planted spies by taking guild commissions to lock on to robbery targets. Since those goods could not be exposed, even if they got stolen, no one reported it. And with that route cut off, of course, they would choose to pay high prices for expedition slots to enter the other world. But she scoffed that even if they sold overpriced slots, that only fleeced them for a little money. He countered that, of course, that was not all. He revealed he had not been running around the other worlds for nothing lately, and she wondered if he meant an otherworld entrance. He confirmed he had already marked all the otherworld entrances in Haicheng, and he could open small gateways to them at any time. So all they needed to do was watch the people who paid high prices for expedition slots, and they could discover the Black Panther gang's targets, and she agreed that they could strike at them, which was great. He cautioned that he did not want too many people knowing about those entrances, so she should pick a few she could really trust and have them wait there. She declared she was coming too because she loved doing that kind of heroic, chivalrous stuff. He smiled at her. She finished by agreeing they should crush them together then. A truck was traveling alone in the underworld. The driver addressed Old Wang, mentioning that the shipment he was moving out was worth quite a bit, and Old Wang reassured him that he need not worry because he would get his share. The two of them moved on unaware that a rock protruded from the ground up ahead. The driver promised he would thank him on everyone's behalf. Old Wang suddenly warned him to be careful and inquired what was going on. Huge rocks sprouted from the earth, and the driver barely evaded them all. The people they carried in the truck were tossed around like loose cargo. The truck then slammed into the rocky mountain. Old Wang demanded to know what had happened and whether there was something wrong with the goods. A member of the Black Panther gang promptly claimed that the goods were definitely fine. He added that soon they would be the ones with problems. The men identified the threat as an ascender and urged everyone to run. The members sneered that they were trash and insisted they should not flee, because he was not finished with his entertainment. Li Yi replied that he would play with him. He activated his skill, Shadow Step. The member snapped, wondering where the dog had come from to ruin his fun. Li Yi countered, questioning whether he meant those D ranks. The member showed surprise. Chin Si-in then wondered aloud what they should do about those people and whether they should kill them all. Li Yi refused and argued that killing them would be too easy for Black Panther, so he had a better plan. The member demanded to know what he intended to do to him. Li Yi insisted that the member should go back and tell Black Panther that all of that was the work of Li Yi of the Shadow Gang. A few moments later, Black Panther visited his injured members at the hospital. He announced that it had been the Shadow Gang and Li Yi. He wondered aloud how that dead miner had gotten so strong. The assistant explained that the immediate problem was deceptive. Their people looked fine on the surface, but in truth, they all suffered full-body comminuted fractures. And even with the best resources, recovery would take half a year and cost no less than $5 million per person. And with 6 people, that totaled $30 million. Suddenly, Black Panther received a new message. He relayed that their 2 other groups had also failed. Black Panther demanded to know who was responsible, and the assistant fingered Li Yi. Black Panther insisted it was impossible because the 3 dimensions lay hundreds of kilometers apart. So even if someone could fly, appearing in all places at once could not happen. The assistant persisted that it really had been Li Yi himself, and their men had even secretly recorded a video. In the recording, Li Yi and the Shadow Gang battered the Black Panther gang members. Black Panther then noticed the member who was filming. He challenged him about recording secretly, and the member warned him not to come closer. Li Yi addressed Black Panther, pointing out that his men really could not take a beating, and suggested that Black Panther come himself. He pushed the point that with so many subordinates needing treatment for a year or two, the expense would sting. Black Panther cursed and vowed that he would definitely kill him. Li Yi strolled into a warehouse compound with Qin Xiyin, the air thick with tension. She casually inquired why they ended up in that warehouse, curiosity edging her tone. He explained that while tailing Kui Shihao earlier, he had stumbled upon the Black Panther gang's hideout next door. And since those punks kept wrecking his operations these past few days, he figured their boss would handle things personally next time. She wondered aloud if he planned to hit the warehouse while Blood Panther was gone, and he confirmed it with quiet confidence. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A Shadow Gang member reported that Blood Panther and his crew had already left for alternate dimension number 3, and he replied that it was perfect and told him to keep monitoring them. So Blood Panther was indeed leading the raid himself, and to keep things smooth, he decided to mess with him a little and buy Qin Xiyin some time. She reminded him that the man was a B rank and suggested sending Duan Ao along, but he brushed it off without hesitation. He explained that he wasn't planning to fight the guy head-on anyway, so dragging Duan Ao would only slow him down. She tried to insist, but he assured her not to worry, since if things went south, he could always use that gate to bail quickly, and she simply warned him to stay sharp. Meanwhile, Black Panther lounged among his men, beaming at the pile of loot. One of his lackeys bragged that they'd hit the jackpot because everything they snagged was top-grade gear this time. Another laughed that their boss really was the best, since one move from him and Li Yi's gang vanished like cowards. Black Panther scoffed that Li Yi was just a miner, wondering what kind of chaos he could even make with a few C-rank tagalongs. But then his grin froze as he caught a strange ripple of energy behind him. He snapped out a demand, wanting to know who was lurking there. Li Yi's shadow coiled tight around one thug's throat in a blink. He remarked with a smirk that a B-rank senses were sharp as ever. Li Yi teased him, asking why everyone was so jumpy, claiming he was only a small-time miner. The choking thug begged his boss for help, but Li Yi warned him to stay still unless he fancied losing a few body parts. Black Panther growled that if it came to that, they could all die together. The trapped member looked confused, staring wide-eyed as an attack came barreling straight for him. Li Yi just flashed a wicked grin while the man screamed in agony. Then he vanished, slipping into a shadow jaunt, leaving the others in panic. When one stammered that he had disappeared, he mocked that a boss who'd even sacrifice his own men was truly impressive. Black Panther spat that he was a rat darting around in the dark. Then his eyes narrowed as he sensed something off. One of his men blurted that he had missed. Li Yi quipped whether being one of his subordinates was a life-threatening occupation, and another nervously begged him not to act recklessly. Black Panther snarled that as long as he could kill Li Yi, a few dead lackeys were no big deal, declaring that he'd drag him out from whatever hole he was hiding in. He unleashed his fire tornado skill, and his men shouted in horror, scattering as flames devoured everything. Li Yi stood there, grin still fixed, watching bodies burn, and shrieks echo through the warehouse before darting away again with shadow jaunt. Black Panther called him a bedbug, who only knew how to scuttle around, demanding he show himself. Li Yi realized he couldn't afford to underestimate a B rank, and decided to retreat. He mused idly about what expression that guy would wear once he returned. Moments later, Black Panther barked, wanting to know what the hell had just happened. A shaken member stammered that it was the Shadow Gang and the Qin family's eldest young miss, while another cried that they had brought 2 B ranks and more than a dozen C ranks, leaving them completely outmatched. Black Panther echoed the words coldly, asking if they really couldn't do anything, and when the member begged for mercy, he responded with a fiery blast that left the man howling in pain. Black Panther muttered that no wonder Li Yi suddenly had backup. Of course, it was Qin Xiyin, and if that was the case, they had no right to blame him for being merciless. Kui Shihao remarked that the matter ended there, but Black Panther pressed him if it truly ended there, and complained that everything he owned had been in that warehouse, worth hundreds of millions. Kui Shihao questioned what he intended to do and wondered if he should lend him a few men to start a war with the Qin family. He mentioned that even though Qin Shaoshang was temporarily away from Haicheng, Qin Xiyin remained untouchable. It was a crucial moment for their experiment, so no matter how deep his grievance ran, he would endure it for him. But Black Panther snapped that he couldn't endure it for another second and spat that the worst outcome would be killing Qin Xiyin and Li Yi before leaving Haicheng. He suddenly froze when he noticed the beasts looming behind Kui Shihao. Kui Shihao warned that if he insisted on courting death, he wouldn't hesitate to silence him right there. Black Panther trembled so badly that he collapsed to his knees on the floor. Kui Shihao told him not to ruin the grand plan over some money, because once the experiment succeeded, he would personally help him annihilate the Qin family. And Black Panther muttered agreement. But inside, he cursed viciously, thinking that of course it was easy for him to say since it wasn't his money gone. And in all his years, he had never been shamed like that. He fumed to himself, wondering if Kui Shihao really believed he couldn't deal with Qin Xiyin on his own. Meanwhile, Qin Xiyin sat in her car heading toward her apartment. She casually remarked to Duan Ao if he didn't think Li Yi was sharp. Duan Ao told the driver to step on it because the eldest young miss apparently missed Li Yi, and the driver complied. She protested, demanding when she ever said she missed him, and he replied that within the hour since she woke up, she had already mentioned Li Yi 24 times. She retorted that she hadn't, and insisted that Li Yi was just one of her few friends, so it didn't matter if she brought him up. Duan Ao warned her to stay alert. He suddenly seized her, and they both leapt out of the moving car. A tanker truck barreled through the small cars in front of it. Its load burst out and sprayed across the scene after it crashed. Duan Ao and another bodyguard rushed to Qin Xiyin, asking if she was alright, and she replied that she was fine. Then, out of nowhere, Black Panther advanced toward them from behind. She instantly caught sight of him. He remarked that it had been a while. Duan Ao barked that they had to protect the miss. Qin Xiyin mocked that Black Panther was far too arrogant and demanded if he really dared move against her with just that handful of men. But to her shock, her vision wavered and blurred. She stammered, asking what was happening, and Duan Ao warned that something was wrong with the liquid. Black Panther sneered, claiming he wouldn't have dared to act unless he was completely certain of victory. He revealed that the substance on her wasn't ordinary. It was the venom of a phantom spider. Even an A-rank advanced would be knocked out for 10 hours after touching it. Duan Ao shouted for Qin Xiyin to run. Black Panther caught him by the throat. He mocked that the man was loyal indeed. But loyal bodyguards who shield their masters never met good ends. Qin Xiyin helplessly cried out Duan Ao's name as he burned alive before her. Meanwhile, Li Yi remained in the apartment. He was outside in the yard, deep in training. He activated his skill, Shadow Jaunt. He darted swiftly from one dummy to another. His movements blurred into slashes as he tore through them. The dummies split cleanly apart. Shangguji addressed him as Xiao Di, noting that his control over his skills had become quite refined. But Li Yi replied that he was already a C rank and wondered if he could be addressed differently. Then he suddenly asked if it was Qin Xiyin calling. Shangguji scoffed, questioning if C rank was really that mighty, and remarked that it was still just an ant with a bit more bite. Li Yi's dagger slipped from his grasp and hit the ground. Black Panther appeared and taunted that he should take a look at who he had brought. Li Yi's eyes widened as he recognized Qin Xiyin. He demanded to know what Black Panther thought he was doing. Black Panther asserted that what he was going to do depends on how important Qin Xiyin is to Li Yi, so he will give him two choices. 1, he could bring a ransom of 1 billion to exchange for her life, and 2, he could watch as he tortured her to death. But she warned that Li Yi shouldn't listen to him because it was an ambush. Li Yi declared he will pay the billion and demanded to know where the trade was. Black Panther ordered that within 1 hour, he should bring the billion ransom to his warehouse, and he must come alone. And if he notifies the Qin family, then Qin Xiyin won't live either. Shangguji cautioned that with his level of strength, he would advise him not to go and get himself killed. Li Yi insisted that he can't just abandon a comrade. And besides, it is not yet certain who will die. A few moments later, Li Yi went to the warehouse, like what they agreed upon. Black Panther taunted that he got some real guts and demanded to know where the money he asked for was. Li Yi replied that he needs to see Qin Xiyin first. Black Panther ordered that they should bring her out. They lowered the hook from the crane. Li Yi was surprised. Qin Xiyin was hanging in front of him. She was trying to warn him, but her mouth was covered with tape. Li Yi then opened his storage space. The money appeared right in front of him. One of the gang members confirmed that the money was real. Li Yi stated that he had received the money so he could release Qin Xiyin. Black Panther explained that he didn't kill him earlier because he hadn't seen the money, and he taunted him whether he was naive enough to think that he could still leave there alive when the money was already in his hands. Li Yi admitted that he knew he wouldn't keep his promise. He detonated the bomb he hid in the stack of money, and then he used his skill, Shadow Jaunt. The huge explosion burned all the money and sent the gang members flying. Black Panther demanded to know where he ran off to. He was then surprised when Li Yi attacked him from behind, but he was still able to dodge in time. He scoffed that he could beat him by playing those little sneak attack tricks. Li Yi countered that his teacher didn't ever tell him not to play with fire when the air is full of dust. Black Panther was alarmed. Another explosion occurred and Qin Xian was alarmed. She was worried about Li Yi. Suddenly, the rope tied up to her was cut off. She was falling. She closed her eyes and braced for the fall, but to her surprise, she didn't fall on the ground. She was flying on the Shadow Wyvern's back with Li Yi. Black Panther observed that it was a flying dragon and an entrance to an alternate dimension, so it seems that the kid Li Yi has quite a few tricks up his sleeve. Once he gets his hands on him, all of that will be his. But one of his members interjected that more than half of their brothers were injured. Black Panther ordered that everyone who could still move should go after them and not let them get away. Black Panther barked that they should hurry up and not let them slip away. Qin Xian blurted out what she should do, gritting that Black Panther's people had already broken in. Li Yi replied that it was fine, saying he just needed those Black Panther guys to help him handle a few messy problems. She should hide with the flying dragon for now and leave everything else to him. She tried to argue, but he waved her off, telling her not to fuss because he would be fine. Shangguji pressed if he had left the entrance open on purpose, so he could use those intruders to break into the second floor. And Li Yi admitted it was true. After all, no one said he had to face the second level alone. Shangguji remarked that he was good at sniffing out loopholes, and Li Yi replied that it was mostly because the second level reward was too juicy to ignore. Armor that could block A-level attacks was no small prize. Out of nowhere, Black Panther's flames blasted toward him from a distance. He muttered that those guys from the Black Panther gang were cautious to a fault. Black Panther hollered, asking if he was right that Li Yi had nowhere left to run. But Li Yi shot back, wondering why he should even bother leaving. He said that he had already rescued Qin Xian. Now was the perfect time to handle him. Black Panther barked a laugh, jeering that he must have lost his mind. His men had no reason to fear since Li Yi was alone, so they should gang up on him first and then go after Qin Xian. Then he'd let his brothers have some fun with the Qin family's eldest daughter. Li Yi replied that while he couldn't match their numbers, other things were another story. They should come out and meet their guests. He swung open the doors behind him, and a cluster of beasts' glowing eyes gleamed through the crack. He announced that they were welcome to join the fight. The Black Panther gang stiffened in alarm. Li Yi darted across the beast's back, springing from one to another to get some distance from the chaos. Black Panther roared after him. He shouted that Li Yi should stop right there. The mutant standing before him was scorched to ashes. The flames surged so fiercely that they lashed at Li Yi in the back. Black Panther sneered, asking if he was right that it was quite the move. Li Yi triggered his shadow transformation skill in response. Then, he shifted into giant hammer form and growled that he would build up his hatred value first. He demanded that Black Panther explode for him, but the power roaring back was immense, and he realized B-level attacks were nothing to scoff at. The fire ricocheted off the ceiling, scattering across the floor and striking the beasts caught in its path. Li Yi pushed his body too far, drained of the strength to keep standing before Black Panther. Black Panther smirked that he had managed to block one attack, but sneered, asking how many more he could take in that condition. Li Yi retorted that once was enough. If he didn't believe it, he should look around. Black Panther's face tightened when he noticed his own flames had lured the beast's fury straight toward him. Black Panther froze for a second, completely thrown off. Li Yi remarked that he should just keep playing since he was heading out first. Black Panther cursed loud enough to shake the walls, grumbling that the brat had tricked him again. He barked for the beast to clear off before he lost his patience. He scorched one that dared to block his path, leaving the air crackling. Then he yelled for Li Yi, fury rising in his chest. He swore through gritted teeth that he'd tear him apart piece by piece. Meanwhile, up in the second layer's core zone, Li Yi pressed Shangguji, demanding if he was lying to him again. He pressed harder, asking if the armor ahead could really take A-rank hits, and when Shangguji questioned why he'd lie, he added that the armor was his reward for surviving the second layer. Li Yi blinked in surprise when he spotted Jingming's body. Shangguji mentioned that he used to be the steward of the second layer, and guessed he'd finally passed away from old age. Once the Black Panther mess was wrapped up, he asked if he could at least bury the man properly, and Li Yi replied casually that he should leave it to him. Shangguji thanked him with quiet relief. He stared at Jingming's remains for a long heartbeat. Then he remarked that they should move on since the armor was waiting ahead. Moments later, Li Yi's eyes widened as the armor came into view. It hung weightless above them like a shadowed crown. He asked Shang-Guji if that was the shadow armor he mentioned, and the man confirmed it with a nod. Li Yi commented that it didn't look bad at all, not as hideous as he pictured, while Shang-Guji quietly mused that it was a shame the brat only reached Shadow Reinforcement Stage 2. Still, even if he'd made it to Stage 3, facing armor capable of tanking A-rank strikes, he doubted the brat would give it up easily. Li Yi suddenly noticed something off and asked what was bothering him. Shang-Guji brushed it off and urged him to take his reward, though Li Yi frowned, sensing him grow strangely sentimental. As he stepped closer to the armor, his gaze stayed locked on Shang-Guji, so he failed to see the sudden twitch of movement. The armor lunged, its gauntlet clamping around his throat before he could react. Jingming's voice rang out, cold and echoing, claiming it had been so many years that he thought his master would never return. He appeared in soul form, channeling his B-rank skill, Shadow Reinforcement Stage 2, and Soul Refinement in tandem. Li Yi demanded to know what was happening, and Shang-Guji's face drained as he recognized him. Jingming spat that no one could have imagined the mighty master would end up trapped inside a weak C-rank creature like that. Shang-Guji called out to Jingming, commanding him to stop at once. Jingming mocked him, repeating the word order like a curse. He sneered, questioning what right he had to command him, explaining that his soul had lingered inside that armor only to await his return and stretch his lifespan. But he'd failed miserably. Just a broken fragment of a soul had crawled back, and now he'd have to refine it to advance to Shadow Reinforcement Stage 3, fusing domain power and making the armor his own vessel. Li Yi watched in alarm as Shang-Guji screamed in agony, his form unraveling into mist and vanishing into the dark. Li Yi pressed Shang-Guji, wondering if he could take down Jingming if he let him steer his body. Shang-Guji countered with a lazy question, teasing if he wasn't scared, he might just steal the whole body for himself while he had the chance. Li Yi snapped back, asking if he still had the nerve to joke when things looked that grim, and remarked that if he truly could seize full control, he wouldn't have handed the body back in the first place. Shang-Guji gave a sharp scoff, like he found the thought amusing. Li Yi muttered that they should just get on with it. Shang-Guji slipped into control, and Li Yi's eyes flared with a cold, dangerous light. He unleashed a surge of violent energy that blasted Jingming clean off his feet. Jingming remarked that with only a fragment of his soul left, he was barely A-rank, then mocked him for struggling so pointlessly. Shang-Guji replied that even an A-rank spark was plenty to deal with someone like him. Jingming's gaze narrowed as he questioned if that was Shadowfield. Shang-Guji invoked his technique, Shadow Second Tier, Shadow Domain. Jingming smirked, assuming it was a weak bluff, and muttered that he hadn't expected him to hide anything or skip teaching him the full scope of shadow skills. Shang-Guji then unleashed another strike, Shadow Morph, Infinite Sword Array, adding that he had kept more than one trick tucked away. Jingming dismissed it, remarking that the body couldn't even survive a third-tier move. Shang-Guji burst forward with Shadow Jaunt, his movement sharp enough to slip past Jingming's assault and reappear behind him. Jingming's eyes flicked in confusion, wondering what kind of technique that was. Shang-Guji brought his blade down, but Jingming barely managed to catch it with his sword. Jingming jeered that he couldn't even hold that second-tier form for long. Shang-Guji checked in with Li Yi, asking if he could still keep going, and despite the pain twisting through him, Li Yi insisted that he was fine and could still endure it. Jingming scoffed that blows like those couldn't even scratch the armor's defenses. Shang-Guji leapt from the ground, declaring that he would drag Jingming out no matter what. His punch landed with crushing force, and though Jingming caught it with his sword, the ground cracked under the impact. Both threw themselves into the fight, every strike ringing with desperation. Jingming's eyes widened when his blade snapped in two. Shang-Guji's punch crashed forward, slamming into Jingming's guard arm. Shang-Guji clenched his teeth, realizing he just needed one more push. Then he caught sight of Li Yi's worsening state. Li Yi forced out that he was fine, though he knew deep down that if they kept going, his soul and body would both burn out from the energy tearing through them. Jingming sneered that he had wasted his chance for a pitiful creature, wondering when he had become so pathetic. Shang-Guji clicked his tongue in irritation. Jingming muttered that he shouldn't blame him then, before slamming his fist forward and smashing Shang-Guji's soul right out of Li Yi's body. Shang-Guji flinched, a sharp jolt of alarm running through him. Jingming remarked that he had caught him at last. He swiftly restrained him, dragging him close with a harsh tug. Shangguji muttered that he truly never expected to be bitten back by the very dog he had raised. Jingming declared that he could finally return to life in full. Li Yi froze at the sight, tension snapping through him. He called out to Shangguji in panic. Shangguji barked back his name, urgency cutting through his voice. He ordered him to run, but Li Yi retorted that Jingming should release him instead. Jingming mocked that it was almost touching, one too afraid to unleash his full strength for fear of burning the other's soul. The other, an insignificant ant, still had the nerve to challenge him. He surged with energy, blasting Li Yi backward without even lifting a finger. The hit smashed through him so violently that blood burst from his lips. Shangguji snapped that he was only a C rank and should stop being an eyesore and get lost. Li Yi spat that from the very start. He had been treated like a slave. He had forced him to fight otherworldly beings and climb levels against his will. Step by step until now, he had made him obey every command. He clenched his teeth until his jaw trembled. He growled that from now on, whether he stayed or not would be his own choice. He recalled that before, he had absorbed shadow energy and torn apart the Blood Panther. So today, he could do the same, wipe out that traitor. Jingming taunted him, daring him to try and see how long his body could last, while Shangguji scoffed that he was a fool for risking his body bursting apart. Li Yi snapped that it wasn't his problem. He roared as he hurled himself forward in reckless fury. A flicker of horror crossed him as he sensed his body unraveling. Chunks of his form dissolved before his strike could even land. Jingming sneered that the stupid creature Shangguji had chosen was downright adorable and jeered if this was supposed to be suicide. Shangguji shouted for Li Yi, but Jingming cut him off, gloating that he should stop resisting. He said he'd make a fine source of nourishment instead. He burst into laughter, standing over Li Yi, who had melted into a dark smear on the ground. But then his triumph twisted into shock as a crushing darkness consumed him whole. He demanded to know what was happening. He barked if it was an eternal night summoned by the shadow domain. He snarled that it couldn't be. He hadn't even finished refining Shangguji, so how could that shadow domain belong to him? Li Yi's voice rose suddenly, cold and certain, as he reminded him that he had already warned him. He would be the one to eliminate him. Jingming lunged straight at Li Yi, but his strike just sliced through that half-formed body like smoke slipping through fingers. He was rattled to the core. Li Yi was still just a C-rank human race, yet his shadow enhancement had climbed to the 3rd tier, and he unleashed Shadow Domain, a twisted skill that let him shift his form however he wanted. Jingming demanded to know if that was truly the 3rd tier. Li Yi replied that it was where the Shadow Domain drew its might, from the souls themselves. No wonder Jingming's heart trembled at the sheer menace of it. He wondered what Li Yi would pull off without that cursed armor. He blasted a searing beam straight at him. Jingming jerked aside at once, barely dodging. Li Yi taunted him, saying he should crawl out of that armor. He told him to do it now, without wasting a second. His fist slammed into Jingming and hurled him into the ground like a broken doll. Jingming barked that it didn't matter if he was 3rd tier. He was still a C rank, while that armor could shrug off even A rank strikes. Li Yi replied that if he couldn't shatter it from the outside, he'd just switch tactics. Jingming sneered that he was being reckless. He swung another punch, but Li Yi's form scattered again, dissolving into creeping shadows. Those shadows slithered into the armor. Jingming shouted that it couldn't be happening. Then agony tore out of him as he screamed. The shadows wrenched him from the armor, ripping his soul clean out and dragging it into the air. Li Yi seized the armor for himself. He remarked that it made sense. That was why Jingming had been hiding inside it, since the armor devoured shadow energy to keep his soul from falling apart. Jingming realized that without it, every second would only sap his strength further. But he still clutched Shangguji tightly, and Li Yi demanded if he was trying to run. He pressed if he really believed he'd get the chance. He summoned shadow chains that coiled around Jingming, binding him midair. Jingming remarked that since Shangguji was tangled up in his soul, striking him would only end up wounding himself too. But Li Yi pressed if he had somehow forgotten that souls were nothing more than shadow energy. He admitted that in that instant, he had lost the protection of his armor. Shangguji snapped back to awareness, his eyes flicking open. Li Yi declared that Jingming should serve as fuel for his own advancement. Shangguji muttered that he had misjudged that man's hunger for power, though Jingming retorted that he had no reason to get smug. He demanded if he truly believed Li Yi would spare him after rapidly ascending by consuming him. He remarked that no living being could ever survive the pull of desire. Li Yi roared when he devoured Jingming. A fierce surge of shadow energy erupted from his body, ripping apart the ground beneath his feet. Shangguji flinched in shock. Li Yi murmured if this was what B rank truly felt like. He then called out to Shangguji. He announced that it was finally his turn. Shangguji stood tense, calling out to Li Yi with a sharp edge in his voice. Li Yi flashed a grin, casual as ever. Shangguji stiffened in alarm when Li Yi suddenly pinned him down with effortless strength. Then Li Yi leaned in, tossing out a question about whether that was what Jingming meant by continuing life. He went on to mention that he had used his domain power to trap his own soul inside that armor, turning that clunky shell into his new flesh and bones. Shangguji fell silent, stunned that he had turned into an A rank while stuck in a parasitic form. Li Yi quipped that the guy was all dark and filthy anyway, and if he absorbed that soul, he'd probably end up with stomach trouble. Besides, that armor was bulky and hideous, and he wasn't in the mood to wear something that ugly, so they might as well call it even. Meanwhile, one of the gang members shouted for Black Panther to save him. Black Panther told him to just hold on, promising that he'd end his misery soon enough. The gang member begged him not to, and his voice broke into a scream. Black Panther sneered, tossing out whether a worthless piece of garbage like him was even worth saving. Suddenly, Li Yi's tone shifted as he asked what that was. He remarked that for a B rank, the guy sure had stamina, even after all those beasts couldn't wear him down. Black Panther's fury spiked the instant his eyes locked on him. He charged straight in, his fist blazing with heat and rage. Shangguji shot him a cold, piercing look. Without moving a single limb, he sent him crashing backward through the air. Black Panther spat out that he was an A rank. He cursed internally, realizing that handling Li Yi alone was bad enough. But now, an A rank had jumped in. Li Yi turned toward Shangguji, tossing a jab about whether it wasn't straight-up bullying for him to interfere. He added that someone of that caliber was just the right target for a little warm-up. Black Panther scoffed inwardly, wondering if he was really going to use him for that. He figured if he could just grab hold of him once, he might stand a chance, and he barked out a challenge to bring it on. Li Yi then unleashed his move, Shadow Domain, wrapping the air in shifting darkness. Black Panther taunted that all those weird theatrics and shiny tricks wouldn't hide the fact that he was still a D rank. But Li Yi threw the question back, demanding who said he was still D rank. He smashed Black Panther aside with one crushing punch. Then he dove forward for another strike, fast and relentless. Black Panther snarled that he was really underestimating him. Li Yi didn't flinch. Their fists met, and the collision sent waves of raw energy bursting in every direction. Li Yi's power hit harder, driving Black Panther back step by step. Black Panther barked out if he was B rank now, stunned at how he had climbed up so quickly. Li Yi grinned and remarked that he had all of them to thank for that, for forcing him to keep pushing every inch of the way. Black Panther pressed what it even mattered if he was B rank, tossing the question with a mocking bite like he already knew the answer wasn't worth a damn thing. He brushed it off at once, insisting rank never counted for much when fists started flying for real. His power, he bragged, carried the kind of grit that never blinked, raw force and stubborn faith in his own skin. He lunged with his elbow, hammering forward with the kind of weight that shattered Li Yi's guard like it was cheap glass. Shangguji casually remarked that inside the shadow domain, Li Yi didn't need to lean on what was his alone. Instead, he guided the energy thick in the air, bending it sharp under his command. He could fling their strength right back at them, showing exactly what the shadow existed to prove. Li Yi muttered that he caught the drift. Still, he admitted it felt strange watching him play the role of some straight-laced mentor. Black Panther pressed if he was just winging the whole show, calling him a self-anointed prodigy. And as he spat that he should drop dead, Li Yi declared he would take the shadow energy spinning around them. He would claim it like it had been his from the start. He pulled the force inward, shaping a thick barrier that gulped down every hit hurled his way. Black Panther stumbled back, eyes wide and pulse skipping. Li Yi grinned that the surge felt wild, almost intoxicating. He flung a burning beam straight at Black Panther's chest. Black Panther twisted away, scraping by on a breath's margin. He lunged again in a blur, chasing the counter like a beast running on instinct. He barked that it looked showy, but too bad it never landed. But Li Yi shot right back, pressing if he was dead sure it missed, teasing that all that frantic dodging probably scrambled his head. That last burst, he pointed out, only drew the perfect line for his fist to crash into his face. He ordered him to back off. Black Panther froze, Disbelief scrawled across him, wondering how any of this stacked up. He figured the kid kept bleeding through energy, but instead of running dry, his force was climbing like a storm ready to break loose. Li Yi taunted if that really was the best trick he had, adding he was let down worse than he cared to admit. The fight, he announced, was already done. Black Panther hissed that he'd drag him to the grave if it killed him doing it. Li Yi called up his dagger, its edge humming like it knew what was coming. He slid through the blow and closed the gap with a move too fast for eyes to catch. He cut twice in brutal fluid arcs, his motion sleek and unrelenting. He slipped past before the ache could even register. Black Panther stared, horror dawning as he realized both his hands were gone. He dropped to his knees, trembling, and wrung out. Li Yi leveled the dagger at the back of his skull, cold as judgment. Black Panther dared him to finish it, snapping that if he had the guts, he should go ahead. Li Yi asked if he truly wanted the end, remarking that would be too easy. Right now, he told him, breathing hurt more than dying ever would. Shangguji nudged him with an idle kind of curiosity, wondering out loud why he still kept that guy hanging around. And Li Yi tossed back that obviously, he was trying to squeeze a few more scraps of intel about Kui Shihao from him. Black Panther sneered with that cool, reckless swagger, throwing out that even if death came knocking right then, he wouldn't cough up a word. Li Yi replied that he already knew, though Qin Shaoshang would definitely cook up some sly trick to pry his mouth open sooner or later. Black Panther warned him he'd better let him go while he still had the chance. Otherwise, Kui Shihao and the NG group would crush him flat without a second thought. Li Yi shot back that he shouldn't waste a wink of sleep over that because even if they crawled into the deepest hole, he'd still hunt them down himself. Shangguji mentioned that he could take a swing at the NG group's A rank, calling it a fair way to settle an old score. Li Yi told him that until they nailed down whether Song Donghao was mixed up in the mess, they had to sit tight for now. Besides, when it came to payback, it always hit sweeter when handled by one's own hand. Meanwhile, inside a military camp, an assistant courteously urged the guests to wait indoors, noting that General Hong would be showing up any minute. Ning Donghao mentioned that troops had been shifting along the route, then casually pressed the city lord if he had any clue what was brewing behind the scenes. Wu Tianchu scoffed, throwing back that how could he possibly know, though judging by the tension in the air, something weighty was on the move. He called Qin Shaoshang, mentioning that his intel net ran wide, and pressed if he'd caught wind of anything, but Qin Shaoshang was already mid-conversation with Li Yi, reporting that Black Panther had snatched Qin Xian earlier that morning, though she was safe, and he'd already dropped the guy. Qin Shaoshang smashed his phone against the chair arm, frustration sparking off him like static. He barked out how the hell he was supposed to keep up with military affairs anyway. He jabbed at his screen, dialing Ning Donghao, and flinging a sharp demand about whether he couldn't leash his damn dog. He tossed in that he already knew perfectly well how to handle that mess himself, and Ning Donghao pressed him for what exactly he was hinting at. Qin Shaoshang shot back that he'd better stay ignorant, or he'd end up next in line. Ning Donghao fired off if he wasn't giving himself a little too much credit, and Qin Shaoshang retorted that they'd find out soon enough. Then General Hong remarked that seeing them so fired up actually felt oddly comforting. But he cautioned that they'd better pour that fire into the right place, especially with something ugly possibly bearing down on Haicheng. He was the Honghai United Government's 3rd Defense Zone's supreme military commander. He declared that the reason he had pulled them all together was because something enormous was moving in fast. His assistant stepped forward, explaining that every person here had clawed their way to A rank during the war 10 years back against the beast from the secondary dimensional rift. He didn't bother to repeat how catastrophic those A and S rank entities inside that rift had been. No one ever figured out why that secondary rift had blinked into existence only to vanish in a blink. But for years, they'd been tracking radiation spikes tied to it. 5 years ago, those readings started flaring again, and since then, the waves had only grown stronger. Just in the last 3 months, 5 bursts had hit nearly the same levels as those a decade ago. Qin Shaoshang, Wu Tianchu, and Ning Donghao stiffened, a chill creeping through the room. Wu Tianchu demanded what exactly he was building up to. General Hong responded that, in plain terms, Haicheng was standing on the brink again, a secondary dimensional rift. General Hong remarked in a laid-back yet commanding tone that they should head back and get ready, because if the secondary passage really showed up, it would spell nothing but disaster for Haicheng. Although the military had already gone into full prep mode, he mentioned that when the moment actually hit, he hoped the 3 of their families could shove the grudges aside and stand shoulder to shoulder against the storm rolling in. Qin Shaoshang muttered that he didn't care much, as long as certain people stopped plotting behind his back. General Hong declared straight out that it was a tense period, and if anyone dared to stir trouble for selfish gain, he wouldn't hesitate to deal with them using equally harsh measures. He then called Qin Shaoshang over and mentioned that he would return to Haicheng with them and brief them on the situation. And Qin Shaoshang responded with a short, cool, all right. The three of them drove off, leaving Wu Tianchu and Ning Donghao standing behind, watching the vehicles fade into the distance. Wu Tianchu remarked with a dry edge that General Hong wasn't even pretending anymore, basically tossing it out that Qin Shaoshang was now working with the military. He added that the way Qin Shaoshang glared at him earlier was probably tied to the Black Panther gang mess, so he figured he'd better keep his head down for a while. But Ning Donghao questioned in a flat tone what the Black Panther gang had to do with him in the first place. Wu Tianchu advised that it was smarter not to dig into it, but that he should still check the news while he had the chance. Moments later, Kui Shihao pressed Ning Donghao for instructions, and Ning Donghao told him to watch the news before running his mouth. He mentioned that he had looked the other way about his dealings with the Black Panther gang before, so he better make damn sure he wasn't tangled in that pit now. The news reported that a major criminal case had erupted in the city that day, as the local crime syndicate, the Black Panther gang, tried to kidnap the heir of the Qin group, but the hostage had been rescued, and now their leader and core members were all on the run. Kui Shihao grumbled that he was just a small errand runner for him and would never dare pull anything without his go-ahead. Ning Donghao warned sharply that he didn't care what it took, whether crawling or dying. He had to earn Qin Xian's forgiveness and sever every tie to the Black Panther gang. Otherwise, even he wouldn't be able to protect him. When the call ended, Kui Shihao cursed under his breath and muttered that it was that fool Black Panther screwing everything up again. Meanwhile, Qin Xian kept urging Duan Ao to hang in there, her voice tight with strain, while Li Yi remarked that the doctor had promised they'd pull every string possible, so he'd pull through no matter what. Then, out of nowhere, Kui Shihao showed up like a ghost stepping into the light. He greeted Qin Xian with a shaky grin, blurting relief that she was unharmed, ranting that he couldn't believe that lunatic Black Panther had gone off the rails like that. The guy clearly wanted to die. Li Yi, watching him with eyes sharp as knives, pressed if he seriously meant to claim he'd been in the dark about what Black Panther had done. Kui Shihao snapped back that of course he hadn't known, tossing up his hands and swearing it had been pure business, nothing more, though now the NG group would cut all ties and even join the chase to wipe out the stray Black Panther scum. Li Yi shot him a glare, snapping if that sudden righteousness counted as moral awakening or just a scramble to save his own miserable hide. Kui Shihao retorted that he should learn when to quit since he'd already milked enough from Black Panther to stay filthy rich, then mocked him about whether he really planned to drag this disaster any deeper. Li Yi barked back that those were just profits, but his life was the real stake on the table now. Kui Shihao turned his eyes toward Qin Xian, his tone sliding cold, and challenged whether that was her family's stance too. She replied with a chill calm that he could go ahead and take a wild guess. Kui Shihao muttered that there was nothing left to discuss. Still, he tossed in with a smirk that the NG group had his back, and without solid proof, they wouldn't dare to touch him anyway. Li Yi warned him to pray the Black Panther remnants stayed dead and buried, or they'd come clawing into his nightmares soon enough. And Kui Shihao smirked wider, saying that was fine. They'd all find out soon enough. A few moments later, Kui Shihao rang up the hospital and ordered them to inject the leftover Black Panther survivors with God's blood. And the doctor confirmed the command without hesitation. One of the gang members erupted in outrage, yelling what the hell they thought they were doing, and that they were Black Panther men. The nurses rammed the syringes of God's blood into their arms without blinking. The man's veins bulged like coiling ropes as he roared in blistering agony. Their restraints snapped like paper and the patients went feral. They shrieked, consumed whole by madness that shredded every trace of reason. Hearing the chaos tearing through the phone, Kui Shihao muttered that he couldn't wait to see what tomorrow's headlines would scream. He mused whether it would tell of cocky youths bleeding out to the Black Panther gang or the Black Panther gang ripping itself apart after overdosing on some freakish poison.